This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate third part of What If Naruto Was Kidnapped at Birth. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Naruto looked around as his upper body sprang up. He was seated on a waiting chair outside the office of the Hokage. Beside him was Neji, who remained as rigid and stoic as ever. Neji whispered, 10 minutes. Not bad. Naruto muttered, so, it was just a dream? Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Neji's head move rigidly, as if he were shaking it. He heard something shuffle into the room as he turned to face the door. It wasn't. Naruto was interrupted by Neji's head nod. That's sick. 10 more minutes later, Kakashi emerged from the office, rubbed the back of his head, and laughed sheepishly. When Kakashi said, I forgot to lock the door, Naruto and Neji began to perspire. And I forgot to tell you that Lord Hokage signed off early tonight, he should be home right now. Naruto blushed and stammered, Thanks, as a fleeting memory came back to him. They got up and started to leave, but Neji remained silent. After watching them go, Kakashi made sure to lock the door this time and shut it behind him. Kakashi. When his name was called, Kakashi turned around to see a very attractive and seductive woman lying on a couch in the corner of the room, her nude body concealed by a thick blanket. When he saw the lustful look in her purple eyes, Kakashi was at her side right away, his own onyx eyes glimmering with desire. She gave him an orange-covered book and opened it to a page that she was keeping track of with her index finger. She muttered, this one, and Kakashi read the page incredibly quickly. He looked at her questioningly, his eyes widening. Kakashi grinned and tore off his mask as she gave him a cheeky nod. He joyfully exclaimed, thank you, Anko, as he took off the covers and started acting out the scenes from his Icha Icha book. As they approached the Namikaze Uzumaki residence, Naruto and Neji continued walking up the street without saying anything. The air was still warm even though the sun was just a few minutes away from setting. Naruto continued to glance sideways at Neji before swallowing. Neji stated, the answer is no, and Naruto blinked. Neji looked at him as though he wasn't a moron. I can see you really want to ask me something and the answer is no. You don't even know the question, doesn't matter, the answer is still, no. I just want to know, no, have you ever? I said no, come on. Neji rolled his eyes as Naruto whimpered. Go ahead, have you ever seen another couple do that? No, see, I told you, have you ever seen anyone else naked before today? Neji's left hand curled a little, but Naruto was blind to it. Well, unaware of who was waiting for them outside Minato's house, Naruto snarled. Don't pretend you didn't hear me, have you ever seen anyone naked? When Naruto heard a squeak, he turned to see Hinata blushing and looking at him with a hint of shame. Neji grinned. He inquired, Lady Hinata, how are you feeling? Hinata continued to gaze at Naruto. For his part, Naruto was able to control the blush that threatened to show on his cheeks. His ears were still blood-red. Hinata began to say, why, but stopped. Neji nearly laughed but was able to control himself. Both genin turned to face him as he said, haven't you noticed before, Lady Hinata? Naruto here is a pervert, which would explain why he would ask me such a question. Despite his best efforts, Naruto's face began to flush, and he scowled at Neji. Naruto wanted to beat Neji into the ground once more as Hinata gave him an unreadable look. Naruto yelled, I'm no pervert, and gestured to Neji. He knows why I asked that question, he was there when. I assure you, Naruto, that I didn't see a thing. I entered the room to find you unconscious. I paid no mind to nothing else. Even if I had, my eyes were on you when I entered and after I left, Neji said with a stern face. Naruto halted when he noticed Hinata was on the verge of fainting. Wah. You, behind me, and then the sounds, she was over him and, no, we weren't. Neji escorted Hinata into the house and said, come on, Lady Hinata. Let's give Naruto some time to let his perverted mood pass him. Neji grinned as she turned to face Naruto. Alone and in disbelief at what had just transpired, Naruto stood outside. He gathered himself and made a self-promise to get Neji back for this before entering the house. 10 times as much. As Hinata attempted to open the door, he opened it, and they both looked at each other, one stunned and the other embarrassed. Following Naruto's utterance, Hinata's blush intensified and she attempted to smile. Naruto said, can we pretend this didn't happen? And Hinata gave a slow nod. I'm sorry, I have to go home, I'll see you tomorrow though. After saying, good night, Naruto planted a kiss on Hinata's cheek. She stumbled and nearly fell, but she managed to catch herself before hitting the ground. She gave a sheepish giggle and turned to leave. Naruto felt a hand land on his left shoulder as he turned to watch her go. He was aware of its owner. Neji said, "Be careful who you mess with," and started to move. Neji was a Jonin, a skilled shinobi, and a fierce foe. All of that was invisible to Naruto, who only saw a bull's eye the size of a human walking behind Hinata. Naruto entered the house upon hearing his name, Naruto, and discovered Minato and Kushina sitting next to each other, holding hands and generally displaying affection for one another. Naruto had never witnessed such a display of affection between two people before. Additionally, they were merely holding hands. Although it only enhanced the display, Kushina also rested her head on his shoulder. Furthermore, Naruto could sense their love radiating from them in the same way that he could sense the sun's heat. It briefly caused him to reconsider his animosity toward Minato before he shook his head and took a seat on the love seat next to the bigger couch. Reluctantly, Kushina pulled her hands away from Minato's shoulder and lifted her head off his shoulder. Minato said, "I hope you enjoyed yourself today?" And Naruto gave a serious nod. "I'd like to ask you something. The both of you," said Naruto. Kushina and Minato nodded despite blinking in surprise. "What is it?" Kushina smiled reassuringly. Kushina arched an eyebrow in response to Naruto's question, "What happened to your son?" Minato asked, obviously perplexed, "What do you mean?" Without using words, Minato and Kushina exchanged a glance and asked, "Why do you two say that I'm your son? What happened to him to make you think that I'm him?" Naruto could tell by the expressions on their faces that an entire argument had gone by in a matter of seconds. At last, the two turned to face him and started talking to him. When one of the legendary Sannin informed them that they ought to be expecting a child, they began. Hearing that made them very happy, and Naruto experienced a heartache. They went on to discuss how they prepared for the birth of their unborn child and how it was to be kept a secret to ensure that no one attempted to interfere with the ceremony. "What ritual?" inquired Naruto. "There is only one time in a Jinchuriki's life when the seal is weakened," Kushina stated, "and it's during childbirth." Naruto questioned, "So, this really only applies to female Jinchuriki? Ever heard of a man giving birth?" she asked in a playful manner. Minato and Naruto remained silent. Minato eventually said, "Anyway, let's continue." He continued by telling him about a masked man who showed up and turned the entire ceremony upside down. He had come dangerously close to killing Kushina, Minato, and Naruto. When he released the Kyuubi, Konoha was nearly destroyed. Minato told his wife and son that he would probably be dead if not for the third Hokage's assistance. Minato described to Naruto his battle with the masked villain and how he had methodically outpaced and outstrengthened him. Naruto questioned, "Who is the masked man?" "Madara Uchiha," he replied, angrily and with perfect seriousness. Naruto questioned with some skepticism, "Isn't he from the same generation as the first Hokage? How is he still alive?" "I'm not sure, but I'm sure that that's who I fought that night." Naruto had to laugh at this. "When he took us home, we rested for a while before I got up to make ramen," he said. Minato joined me and for a while, all was peaceful. All the chaos had settled down and we could rest without having to worry about anything planning on destroying the village, Kushina said with a sad grin. "Or so we thought," Minato continued, recounting the full murder of their son. Naruto absorbed all that was said to him and pondered in silence for a while. He tilted his head back slightly to see Minato grinning down at him after feeling a gentle hand rest on his head. He said, "You might want to rest up. I'll have decided on your mission by tomorrow," and then he went upstairs and into the hallway. Looking at Naruto, Kushina noticed his expression and was relieved that he didn't snarl or glare at Minato. Even though he didn't exactly smile at him, it was preferable to being angry. After quietly saying, "Good night, Naruto," Kushina stood up and gave him a forehead kiss before doing as her husband had instructed. Kushina went into her room, shut the door, and began looking in the drawers by the door. She heard Minato leap onto their bed after leaving the restroom. She turned and threw a bright red nightgown on the bed, grinning. Minato had closed his eyes and was now only dressed in his black sweatpants. With a gentle, "I love you," Kushina made Minato smile. Shortly after removing her shirt and throwing away her pants, Kushina rolled her long, gorgeous red hair into a bun. Without opening his eyes, Minato stood, approached her, and gave her a hug. Her skin was creamy and smooth under his rough hands. At the end of each nerve where their skin touched it, shocks of electricity ignited. The stunning violet orbs Kushina referred to as eyes were the first thing Minato saw when he opened his eyes. He saw a flash of love and happiness in them as he gazed lovingly into them. Minato whispered, "I love you too," as his arms slipped around her waist and drew her in. The words that always escaped Minato when he tried to express how much he loved Kushina suddenly came and fueled the kiss after he had given her a gentle kiss. As they separated, he noticed Kushina gasping for air to put into her lungs. He couldn't help but think of all the long nights they had spent together, feeling each other's bodies intimately and showing their love for one another through actions and tender touches, as he watched her chest move animatedly as she inhaled deeply. With a cunning smile, she covered Minato's icy hands and shifted them to her back, directly over her bra. There was no need to speak because Minato unclasped them right away and assisted her in taking off her bra. As the undergarment dropped to the floor, Minato gazed with primordial love and desire at Kushina's firm, round breasts with rosy tips. She pressed her breasts against his muscular chest as his lips found hers again. She sensed his heartbeat, and he sensed hers against her chest. Minato spun with Kushina in his arms, using all his speed, and they ended up on the bed, Minato on top of her. Kushina was taken aback by the action, but she was not offended. She encircled his waist with her long, smooth legs and planted another amazing kiss. Then Minato started to suck on her silky neck as his mouth moved down her jaw to her neck. A deep desire burned in the pit of his stomach as she moaned. Knowing that he could get his wife to make those noises made him happy and proud as a husband and a man. As Minato persisted in his attack on her neck, sometimes causing a growling groan from him, Kushina writhed and moved her waist. She kept meowing, and when Minato's hands wandered over her back and sides, she even gave an unconscious squeak. When the front door suddenly flew open and footsteps could be heard leaving the house, the atmosphere was ruined. Outside, there was a yell, and although Minato was surprised, he knew who it was. Breathlessly, Kushina questioned, "Who?" Minato said, "Jiraiya," while standing and gazing out the window. He wasn't even shocked that Naruto was involved when he realized it was Jiraiya. The fact that Jiraiya was lying on the ground with Naruto sitting on the top of his head and his massive right hand on his jaw did startle, even shock, him. To make sure he wasn't insane, Minato bounded out of the house and down the stairs. Angrily and painfully, Jiraiya yelled, "What is wrong with you?" Though not as loudly, Naruto yelled back, "That's for knocking me out," with equal rage. "I see," they both said, blinking, and turning to face the door, they saw Minato standing there with his arms folded across his chest and a perceptive look on his face. After giving his head another rub, Naruto got to his feet. Naruto muttered, "I'm going to bed," but a hand suddenly appeared and blocked his way inside the house. "What's the big idea?" Disregarding Naruto's question for a moment, Minato said, "Jiraiya. Sensei, I'm guessing you're here to crash for the night?" Jiraiya said, somewhat numbly, "You got it, kid." While maintaining his jaw, he stood up, repositioned his jaw, and then let go of it. Minato looked in Naruto's direction. Minato informed him, "The guest room is usually reserved for Jiraiya. Sensei," and Naruto gave him a stern look. Minato shook his head in response to Naruto's irate question, "So what, I'm getting kicked out to give this drunken geezer a place to sleep?" Minato entered his house and went into the hallway, saying, "You can sleep in the other room?" Before turning his scowl toward Jiraiya, who passed by and placed a heavy hand over Naruto's head, Naruto glared at his retreating form. He murmured, "You sure or something," and walked past him. After giving a snort, Naruto entered as well and shut the door. Before turning into the guest bedroom and slamming it shut, he trailed behind Jiraiya. Minato waited for Naruto to ascend the stairs before turning to enter the space between his room and the restroom. Following Minato into the room, Naruto noticed that it was the only room in the house with a different color paint job. The hallways were painted a deep shade of gray, and the entire house was a sort of eggshell white. It was a pale blue in this room. Naruto had a strange feeling about this room, perhaps a phenomenally strange one. That was as far as he could explain it. There was something strange about this room. It exuded sadness and joy, love and grief. After a moment, it seemed to be just another room with 2 windows, 2 doors, a floor, a ceiling, and 4 walls. He started to question whether the sensation actually occurred because it came and went so quickly. Off to the side, right beneath the window, was a bed. It was just one mattress on top of another without a frame. The only other object in the room was a tiny, childish drawer with a tiny mirror on top and tiny cartoon stickers stuck to the drawers and sides. "Nice room," remarked Naruto bitterly. Minato shot him an irritated, watered-down glance. Whatever had irritated him earlier, he was kind of over it now. After saying, "It was a," Minato halted and left the room. He stepped over the threshold and stopped. "Don't look in the closet." Naruto looked at the closet door and then arched an eyebrow. With his back to Minato and the closet, he lay down on the bed. "I'm not interested." Minato didn't look at Naruto or try to read his body language because he was too exhausted to care and just wanted to spend time with his wife. Kushina was already in bed when he walked into the room. He peeked under the covers to see Kushina staring at the ceiling. her cheeks streaked with dry tears. Despite having sad violet eyes, she had a more thoughtful expression on her face. She uttered the words, "All I wanted was a family," just above a whisper. Half of her words were understood by Minato, who deduced the other half by reading her lips. "You do have a family," Minato told her, grinning wearily. "All three of us are together again." She grinned. He saw the bitter sweetness in her smile. "We're not acting like it." Minato extended her arm and gave her a hug. The woman he held was always so strong, so self-assured, so fearless. No, not without fear. She was too intelligent to be afraid. She was only human, so of course she had her fears. However, her courage, confidence, and strength were what enabled her to never give up on her son and to continue to hope for Naruto's return. Minato lacked strength. Doubt frequently obstructed his vision, clouded his heart, and led him to give up. It repeatedly informed him that his first son had been taken from him by the ruthless grasp of death and fate, and that he was no more living than the dirt he walked on. However, Kushina was wiser. She served as his beacon, guided him home, and gave Minato new hope and the bravery to face the challenges. She served as his guiding light, preventing him from becoming lost. It was his turn to stand up for her now, to be confident and strong. "We will, my love," Minato reassured her while stroking her shoulder. "One day, we will be that family you always dreamt of. You won't ever have to go through that loneliness ever again. I promise." After some hesitation, she returned the kiss after he had kissed her on the lips. After doing that for a few minutes, Kushina shifted to sit on top of Minato, straddling his waist. Minato noticed the moon's silver haze emerging from the space created by the window's curtains. He saw Kushina's moon outlined silhouette, a lovely shadow with all the sweetly feminine lines and curves. It was a liquid, smooth thing, as controlled and desperate as the almost motionless surface of a rushing river, and she kissed him again, and he kissed her back. That was how it continued, with gentle sighs, pounding hearts, and skin and light touches. Together, they moved, experiencing the intensity of their hunger and need for one another as well as an unadulterated fusion of passion, warmth, and love that left them feeling incredibly intimate. With their mouths together and their breaths mingling, it ended in silence, which made the sensation even more painful. She reclined next to him until their racing hearts subsided. After that, she got up and said, "I have something to tell you." Minato asked, "What is it?" and noticed a kind of joy shining in them. The day she saw him for the first time in years and the day Naruto was born are the only 2 times he has seen her. Her lips found his ear as she bent down to touch it. She spoke so softly and slowly that Minato nearly missed it, even at that distance. However, he hadn't, and his eyes widened like saucers. He muttered incoherently, "You, why you're kidding?" and saw Kushina shake her head, her eyes threatening to well up with tears. He collapsed onto his back, gazing up at the ceiling. "Wow." She let her head rest on his still, warm chest and said, "I know." "Another one?" she asked, nodding her head once more. "That's great. Does anyone else know?" She replied, "Aside from the doctor, only you and I know," to which Minato laughed. The news was so amazing that he was unable to speak. She asked, "Can we keep it a secret?" and Minato gave her a look that suggested she had made a request. He said, "Of course, my love. But how come?" Minato gave her a sympathetic nod and planted a kiss on her forehead. "I don't want to take any attention away from Naruto. This might do that." He said, "I understand," and they nuzzled closer, enjoying their intimacy until Kushina fell asleep. Minato simply observed her, taking pleasure in the motions his wife's chest made. He was irrationally afraid that when he woke up, Kushina would be sleeping in his arms, her chest not rising or falling, as if she had stopped breathing during the night. After doing this for a few minutes, he began to lose consciousness and gave in to the gentle lullaby of sweet, sweet sleep. It was Naruto. He had been able to avoid peering into the closet. When he told Minato he wasn't interested, he hadn't been lying, but eventually his curiosity began to win out. The only sensible thing for him to do was to leap out of the second-story window and flee. But he wouldn't get lost again, so it would be all right. Just in case he forgot, he kept a shadow clone hidden close to the house to accompany him back. He enjoyed taking aimless walks because they allowed him to become familiar with his surroundings and occasionally discover new things, locations, and routes. The fact that his feet had led him back to the bridge did not surprise him. Silent and wary, he crossed the bridge. Since he woke them up while they were sleeping, he didn't want any animals to attack him. The image of the moon reflected over the flowing river caught his attention, and he grinned. A pale green light glowed on the bridge's side, and Naruto blinked. He stepped aside and peered over the railing. He could hardly see anything with the green light, but he did spot a silhouette sitting on the bridge's side, close to the river's edge. The small hands of the silhouette, hovering over a slowly dying fish whose weak attempt to return to the river grew more sluggish by the moment, were the source of the green light. The fish occasionally leapt, indicating that it was struggling, but ultimately, like all fish without water, it perished. The silhouette slammed his or her fists on the ground and squeaked in rage. Invoking the Kyuubi's chakra to the palm of his hand, Naruto raised his right hand. When he focused a little more, he ignited the chakra, and it turned into a sizable fireball that could light up everything within 10 feet of it. "Cute trick," said Naruto jokingly. Azure eyes met deep jade ones as the silhouette looked up in surprise. Naruto noticed that the silhouette was really just a girl with long pink hair and large, round green eyes. She was wearing a dirt green skirt and a red sleeveless shirt that appeared to be too big on her. The girl had a bandana fastened around her forehead. Her tear-stained cheeks were what Naruto was looking at. Naruto, attempting to suppress his tears, inquired, "What exactly was that technique you were using?" He couldn't allow his chivalrous side to take over now. This was a Konoha girl. He needed to exercise caution. The girl with the bubblegum hair leapt to her feet and started running off. Naruto called out to her, Hey, but she had already left. She moved pretty fast, damn it." Naruto gazed at the fish below. With a sigh, he leapt to the ground while holding the fireball in his left hand. As he landed next to the fish, he noticed that his side gills were occasionally opening and closing. After carefully pushing the fish into the water, Naruto saw life start to reappear inside it. As he closed his fist and put out the fireball, he shook his head and looked back in the direction he had seen the pink-haired girl run. "Weirdo." A hand slammed the cigarette end on the ashtray, and smoke poured out of both nostrils. Obito muttered, "Sick pieces of cancer," as he exhaled the remaining smoke in his lungs. He held onto the scarf that was delicately draped around his neck with his left hand. Perhaps it was made of cotton because the fabric felt soft to the touch. Obito didn't care about it. He wouldn't care if it was made of salt and barbed wire. It would still be precious to him and he would never remove it. Her voice, the lovely, passionate sound of her speaking to him, was still audible to him. She had said shyly, "I made you something," and Obito had been staring at her with his left eye, blinking. He was sleeping on the branch of a tree, leaning against it. With a yawn, he leapt down and landed next to her. As her left hand brushed a brown stray hair out of her face and her right hand concealed something behind her back, she was flushed. "She looks adorable." As he brought forth the smile he kept for her, Obito thought. He asked cheerfully, "What's up?" And the girl flushed. Without saying anything, she gave him a pale green box with a blue ribbon tied to prevent easy opening. Obito grabbed for it after blinking. As he removed it from her grasp, his hand lightly touched hers. Despite his blush, he continued to look directly into her eyes. He examined it carefully before taking a whiff. The girl started to perspire, even more after he started shaking it, but she still giggled. "What is it?" She laughed. He said, "Just open it, dummy." Obito discovered a red scarf that was exquisitely stitched and had the Uchiha emblem on both ends. She looked at it more closely, then coughed into her hand and flushed. Her head shook. "It must have cost you a fortune," she said. The materials were a bit pricey but before fading away. "You made this yourself?" she asked, blushing and nodding her head away. After gazing at the piece of cloth in his hands, Obito grinned. When she looked up after hearing the rustle of cloth, she saw Obito wearing the scarf and grinning silly as usual. The smile was reciprocated by her. Obito took hold of her right arm and gently pulled. She took a small step forward and was taken aback when she collapsed into Obito's embrace. He cradled it against his cheek and said, "I love it," while she giggled. "Is it that great?" he exclaimed, phenomenally soft, which caused more laughter. "Thanks." She said, "You're welcome, Obito," and they stood there, clinging to one another, until they heard someone cough from the left. The two flushed as they noticed Kakashi looking at them with a smile hidden beneath his mask and eyes like a cunning cat's. He said, "Am I interrupting something?" And the two parted ways right away. He asked him first, "Obito?" But he simply scowled and turned his head away. "Rin?" she asked, simply turning away from Obito. Kakashi nodded when she said, "Not at all," but he was aware of this. "Okay. Well, let's get going. You know how Sensei gets when we're late for a mission." Obito gave a bitter laugh. He smirked and said, "Says the only person in the world who has a worse sense of time than I do," to which Kakashi blinked and gave him a sidelong glance. Obito snarled and sprinted in Kakashi's direction, asking, "Did you say something, Obito?" He struck him with his fist, but Kakashi dodged and leapt out of the way of Obito's subsequent kick. "Close," he said teasingly, and left. Rather than sprinting after him, Obito simply snorted and turned to face Rin. He said, "You coming?" With a little more composure than before. Obito waited until she was by his side before beginning to walk after she nodded. After exchanging glances, they blushed and turned to face one another, occasionally stealing glances. Fighting back tears, Obito gritted his teeth. Before the scarf relaxed and reached for a cigarette, he held it firmly in his fist. There was nothing in the box. With little effort, he grabbed the empty box and crushed it. He threw it haphazardly out the window, then took a deep breath and spat out a tiny ball of fire to burn the box to the ground. As the box turned to ashes and scattered across his lawn, Obito looked on without comment. The ashes were carried through the air and off the floor by the wind. Obito looked up to see Kakashi standing on a nearby tree branch, grinning at him from beneath his mask. "Smoking can kill ya," Obito said. Obito laughed. He said, "No kidding," and then he looked at Kakashi. "It's late and you look like you just tried to fight your way out your clothes, or into them." Kakashi reddened, but his mask covered it up. With a wave of his hand, he played it off and leapt forward. Kakashi flew through the window and landed on the floor perfectly in place as Obito stepped back. In his own words, "I didn't necessarily start the fight." He checked the apartment he shared with Obito and discovered that the living room was clean. "You've been thinking about her again, haven't you?" Obito said, couldn't help it, and he shifted to the couch. Kakashi's hand clasping on his right shoulder stopped him. Without introducing himself, Kakashi stated, "It's starting to get worse," but Obito already knew what he was talking about. Obito muttered, "Let's not start this again," as he moved his shoulder to break free of Kakashi's hold. All Kakashi did was grab his shoulder once more and force him to turn around to face him. Embarrassed, Obito turned away. "This has gone far enough, Obito. I know you miss her, I miss her too, but you're going too far," he said. After entering the kitchen and searching through the trash, Kakashi returned to the living room. 3 empty cigarette cartons were visible when he lifted his right hand. "Smoking? I know it's not illegal, but I remember a time when you would have beat my ass if you'd seen me even touching this stuff." Taking the cartons out of Kakashi's grasp, Obito tossed them carelessly into the kitchen. "And I still will, damn it." When Kakashi said, "Everyone's moved on," he raised his hands in frustration. "Why can't you?" Obito yelled, "Because I love her," and Kakashi could see the rage brewing in the back of his eyes. Kakashi exclaimed, "I loved her too," but Obito gave him a sour grin. He shot back, "Not the way I did," pushing Kakashi away. "You always rejected her advances. You said no as if you were talking to a little girl. We were only kids. I'm not talking about then, I'm talking about the year before she died. She was 17 then, she wasn't a kid anymore. She came up to you and asked you out, one last time. Do you remember your answer?" Kakashi started to say, "Obito," but Obito shook his head. "No, listen, I'm not done. You said no, so when I came to help her through it, she surprised me by asking me out. Finally, after years of trying to get her attention, I finally got it. She gave me a chance and since then, I've been happy from sun up to sundown," he said as tears began to form in the corners of his eyes. They had previously attempted to discuss this, but Kakashi was always too scared to allow it to get this out of hand. There was nothing he could do now. "Do you remember her 18th birthday, about a year later? The whole party? Do you remember?" "Someone brought alcohol," was Kakashi's monotone response. "Enko, Guy, Kurenai and I were all drunk as hell." Obito prevented him from responding. "Yeah, do you want to know what happened after the party? She led me to some secluded clearing just outside the village. We sat near the river and talked all night. It was so amazing just how much we talked. We talked about nothing and everything all at the same time." Kakashi said, "I see," and Obito gave a nod. Then, Obito hesitated before continuing to tell Kakashi. "She then gave me a look and said something I never would have imagined hearing her say in a million years. We kissed for what seemed like an eternity before parting ways, and something about the kiss felt different than the others. Obito, I need you. I need you to make me feel like a woman because I really want you. That's what she told me," he said, and Obito could see that Kakashi was astonished, but his face remained unchanged except for a slight widening of his eyes. "I made an effort to talk her out of it. I assured her that I could wait and that we didn't have to jump right into that kind of thing. Do you know what she said? 'I love you, Obito,'" he said, pausing to catch his breath because by this point his eyes were welling with tears. "We succeeded. I made love to the world's most beautiful woman that evening. I swear I don't regret it," he declared with pride. "What precisely are you clinging to, then? Are you holding yourself responsible for her passing?" "I don't blame myself for her death. I know that's something not even I'm stupid enough to believe," Obito said, turning his gaze from the ground. "When I find the bastard who killed her," he trailed off, his mind churning with dreadful images of blood and torture. "What is it, then?" Kakashi inquired. The night we made love, I couldn't say it, Obito said, tightly closing his eyes as more tears streamed down. What do you say? I could express my love for her to her. I chased her for years, asked her out on dates non-stop, but the night we finally expressed our love, I couldn't tell her, he said, sobbing and collapsing to his knees. Obito, the next day, she died without knowing, he said, leaning forward and slamming both fists into the floor. That was 11 years ago. Why, then, does it seem like it was yesterday? In his hysteria, Obito didn't realize he had activated his Sharingan, so he asked and locked eyes with Kakashi. Kakashi looked into Obito's eyes and watched as each of the three tomo in each eye shook violently before starting to shake and transform into an odd-looking Sharingan. Obito! Kakashi yelled, and Obito paused to gather his thoughts. He closed his eyes and inhaled, and when he opened them again, they had returned to their typical black hue. Obito looked down at his hands and said, I'm sorry, Kakashi. That was a weak moment. It was not intended for you to see it. After saying, it's fine, Kakashi knelt down in front of Obito, took hold of the back of his neck, and pressed his forehead to Obito's. I also miss her. He told him, I know I'll never fully understand the type of bond you and her shared, but I do understand how it feels to lose a loved one. I don't go a day without thinking of her. I know you do, Obito said, squeezing the final tear from his eyes before wiping it away. Holding on to the past too tightly is bad. You can't live your entire life reflecting on the past. Not even when you are blind to the future. Even if tomorrow doesn't turn out as you had hoped, all you can do is keep going and try to believe that it will be what it should be. That's quite deep. From whom did you rip it? Kakashi grinned as he stood back up, and Obito joined him in asking with a smirk. He stretched his weary body and received a few gratifying pops. I'm gonna go to bed, he said, rubbing the back of his neck as he made his way to his room. Night, he waved. I got it from Kushina, believe it or not, he said, yawning. Obito shook his head, looked at the empty cartons he threw into the kitchen, and said, night, before retiring to his own room. Cancer sticks. Some distance away, a young boy approached the shack that stood close to the Leaf Village's entrance. One of the Chunin remarked, you know, it's pretty late, while the boy gazed at him wearily. Without saying another word, the boy passed out. The Chunin standing guard hurried to help him up and send him straight to the hospital. My town, need help, bad men. Minato had been anxious since he woke up because he needed to prepare Naruto's mission. He wasn't even sure which mission to pick, organize his team so they could go with him, and, to top it all off, Danzo had been writing him all morning to have the boy imprisoned. In the end, a young boy lying in a hospital bed provided him with the solution to the majority of his issues. While Minato, Obito, Kurenai, and the new team Kurenai waited while the man spoke to the child, Naruto stood behind Minato. Obito muttered, I see, so that's what we're going up against, and the boy gave a nod. I just about survived. I had to sneak out past curfew, but they nearly caught me. The sooner I return, the better, as my mother is likely extremely concerned about me. Passively summarizing, Minato said, so you want to hire 2 bodyguard teams and a handful of our best construction workers with only 1,000 ryo to your name? Even though he knew it sounded foolish to even consider asking, the boy nodded. Are you aware that the typical cost of this kind of mission is approximately $500,000? The boy nodded numbly and hung his head glumly when Minato asked. Minato looked at the other people in the room, while Naruto gazed at the boy with a kind of sympathy. What are your thoughts, guys? Rules are rules, Lord Hokage, Sasuke replied. If he can't afford it, no matter how sad his story is, he should find someone else. While a bit cruel, I understand Uchiha's viewpoint, Shino said with certainty. However, I believe a sort of financial plan could be made. Kiba said somewhat distractedly, yeah, what Shino said, and Minato looked at Kurenai. You know I can't turn my back to this, she said while sighing. Nevertheless, I will respect whatever decision you make, Lord Hokage. I dare someone to stop me, Obito said, extending his right arm in a fist. Obito said. I'm here to pass this trial, and I'd rather face a powerful gangster overlord with tons of tough goons than do something stupid like chase after a cat. Naruto shrugged, leaning against the hospital room door. However, his final remark caused every genin in the room to perspire. Looks like it's your lucky day, Minato said. She smiled as she turned back to the boy. 1,000 ryo? You can't be serious, Sasuke objected. Divided among roughly 20 individuals? Sasuke was silenced by Minato's intense gaze. If it has to come out of my own pocket, I'll guarantee that each and every one of you gets the appropriate pay for this mission, Minato said as he stood. By noon, you will depart for the Land of Waves. Inari will have roughly 3 hours to rest here. Rejected. Everyone who wasn't in bed nodded and walked out of the room. Kurenai smiled at Naruto when he opened the door for him, and then he moved aside as Sasuke, who didn't even acknowledge his presence, Kiba, and Shino left, the latter two giving him a strange look, despite the fact that Kiba's dog was a little friendlier than his master. Before leaving, Obito merely chuckled and gave Naruto a shoulder pat. Naruto smirked as he caught up to Neji as he passed by the room. "What are you doing here, then?" They continued to walk even after Neji turned his head to face Naruto in response to his question. Neji said, "I don't think you really care," and Naruto scowled. "What? So why would I inquire?" As he predicted, two nurses rolled a gurney out of the room, and Neji stopped, saying, "So then I could walk into the gurney that'll be leaving the room up to the left-right. Now," the two said as they continued down the hall, Naruto complaining angrily. "Don't be so angry, I almost fell for it, really?" Naruto turned to face him and asked incredulously. "Nope, I'm just distracting you long enough for this to happen," Neji said, shaking his head. Naruto ran into an open door just a second after Neji finished, crashed into it, and fell to the ground while clutching his nose. "That hurts, damn it." Neji laughed, pushed the elevator's down button, and Naruto spat out more curses. When the elevator rang, indicating that the elevator car had reached Neji's floor, Neji smirked and turned to face it. "Don't mess with me. I'm a lot smarter than you are," Neji said, and the door opened, giving him a massive pie to the face. Neji raised an eyebrow and turned to face Naruto, wiping his face with his hand. "Clone waiting in the elevator with a pie ready to throw at me?" Wiping the blood from his nose with his arm, Naruto grinned and said, "Yup." Neji said, "Now that's just sad," and Naruto chuckled. Naruto said in a mysterious way, "You might want to get that out of your hair before it sets. I added my own secret ingredient to it that you might or might not like," and Neji gave him one last look before entering the elevator. Naruto stood, his nose stinging with each breath, and he grimaced in agony. "Hey, is there anyone here who can help me?" I said aloud, "but I see no one around," Naruto complained as he walked down the hallway to the nurse's station and noticed someone stooping from beneath the desk, probably to pick up something that had fallen. "Hello, huh?" The nurse instantly stood up when Naruto said that. The nurse stopped abruptly as she looked directly at Naruto, and Naruto's eyes widened. "I'm sorry, how?" he said. You're the one I saw last night," Naruto yelled, gesturing to the nurse. As he had described, the nurse was the same green-eyed, pink-haired girl he had seen the previous evening, and she sprinted down the hall in a panic. "Hey." Before he became tired of running, Naruto picked up his pace and was able to pass the nurse after chasing her through doors, hallways, and stairs for roughly 10 minutes. The floor was still wet and slick, so when Naruto stomped his foot down to stop, he lost his balance, fell, and slid down the hall until he crashed into the wall. Unfortunately for him, the janitor decided to mop the floor that day. With a groan, he paused for a moment before getting up and glancing down the corridor, which appeared to have two hallways where two nurses with similar hairstyles ran into a room on the right. Shaking his head, Naruto dashed down the hallway, picked a door at random, and rushed into the room. Upon scanning the room, Naruto failed to spot any pink-haired nurse, but he did spot something slightly more intriguing. A 5'5" figure with short indigo hair, smooth, creamy skin, and the most stunning eyes in the most beautiful shade of lavender. To put it briefly, he was in Hinata's room. Yes, she was wearing only her panties. Naruto-kun. Hinata stammered incredulously, and Naruto flushed and pressed against the door, letting blood trickle down his nose a moment later before opening the door and going outside before shutting it again. With a kind of delight that only he had seen Hinata in that light, he gazed at the door that prevented him from seeing a sight that any boy his age would kill to see, but he resisted the urge to open it again and catch another glimpse. He turned it down repeatedly. He noticed movement and turned to the left to watch the nurse who had briefly eluded him attempt to slip away. "Hey, all I want to do is talk," with a sigh, the nurse turned. "I didn't do it," she said remorsefully. Naruto approached the nurse and started talking when he thought she wouldn't flee again. "Allow me to share with you. I usually assume that the person I'm speaking to must have done something when I say, 'I just want to talk,' and they respond, 'I didn't do it.' Do you understand what I mean?" The girl with the pink hair flushed when Naruto said that. "What are you looking for? I'm currently quite behind schedule and a little busy." When Naruto said, "All I want to know is the technique you used last night," the nurse sneered. "You're insane. I have no technique. Even I'm not a kunoichi." "Now, pardon me," the girl said, brushing past Naruto, who took her arm after glancing at the name tag still attached to her uniform. No, wait, Sakura, she said, pausing briefly, perhaps wondering how he knew her name, before recalling her name tag and releasing his hand. Naruto chuckled slyly as he opened his left hand and saw Sakura's name tag over his palm, her picture on it, and her smiling, a little too forcefully, but he had seen worse. He watched her go and turn to the left, out of his line of sight. Naruto wanted to know who this Sakura girl was for some reason, but he would have to ask one of the few people in Konoha he truly trusted to tell him about her, and that one person was half naked in one of the hospital rooms right now. He approached the room and rapped on the door. Hinata. Without hearing her response, he knocked again, a little louder and harder this time, but nothing came. He stammered, his resolve gone the moment he saw Hinata dressed as she was. Naruto scowled as he considered going in once more. She was not answering his knocks, which suggested that she had either fainted or wasn't in the room. The latter seemed more realistic. He had to check on her, though, and when he opened the door and entered, he saw Hinata lying on the floor with a tiny pool of blood around her head. Naruto hurried to her side without hesitation, even though his cheeks were flushed. Before his hands moved to her neck, he paused and looked over her body once more. I'm only touching her to make sure she's okay. I'm only looking at her awesome body because I want to make sure she's okay. Wow, her skin's soft, Naruto thought in his mind. Before shaking his head and picking her up bridle style, he said, if she wanted, she could probably have any man in this stinkin' village. Hell, she'd probably have men from my village getting in line just to have her talk to them. He placed her on the chair, bed thing that was behind her and then examined her, making sure her right arm was still in the sling. He was no physician, but if the trail of blood from her nose was any indication, Naruto had to assume that was the source of all the blood on the floor. But what was the cause of her bleeding? The majority of the scenarios he rehearsed in his mind had one thing in common. Hinata accidentally fell forward and hit her nose against the desk, and she fell forward and fell face first on the floor after realizing Naruto had discovered her half naked. He looked around the room in panic, saying, "Oh Kami, this is my fault," and began searching the cabinets for smelling salts. But all he found were needles, various colored and shaded liquids, gauze, and other medical supplies, except for smelling salts. Hinata, please wake up, he said, blushing again as he ran up to her and gave her a gentle shoulder shake. Stay alive. You're needed. Naruto let out a roar in his hysterical state. Oh no. Neji is going to strike that. Your father will murder me. He went to the sink, cupped some water in his palms, and splashed her face with it after pleading with the unconscious girl, but she refused to change. All he managed to do was wet her smooth, creamy body, which the light did in an interesting way, and his shorts felt 2 sizes too small. A sudden thought struck Naruto like a ton of bricks, causing his face to flush deeper. He approached Hinata slowly, eyed her lips, licked his own lips, and felt perspiration trickle down his forehead. On its own initiative, his head began to tilt forward, and he noticed her lips moving toward his. Or was it the other way around? It didn't matter. They would meet again in a second. When Naruto closed his eyes, he was so close that he could faintly feel her sweet breath on his lips. It made him shiver and he hesitated for a moment before slowly shaking his head and finally touching her lips. Don't pass judgment, didn't it work in the movies? If someone had asked Naruto, the whole was far greater than the sum of its parts, and this is what it would have felt like to kiss Hinata. Electric shocks jumping from nerve to nerve. Fireworks exploding, lighting up the dark void of the night sky. Tasting the first noodle of ramen after going more than 24 hours without any. When a gentle, small hand grabbed Naruto's shoulder, he nearly jumped out of his skin, blinked, and experienced a strange kind of happiness upon realizing it was Hinata keeping hold of his shoulder. He was shocked and about to speak when he felt something warm, moist, and electrifying slither into his mouth, but he was not prepared for Hinata to put her only arm around Naruto's neck and intensify the kiss. Naruto's eyes opened, but he soon noticed that his tongue was dancing with Hinata's. Although his tongue had a mind of its own, Naruto believed that it was smarter than he was in this particular situation. Though it was more controlled the last time, a primal instinct started to cloud Naruto's thoughts. This time, it was fully controlled, and he could only feel his hands grabbing Hinata's waist again. It didn't help when her right hand slid under his shirt and began to wander around his slender stomach. He was panting, and every breath that touched Hinata's skin made her shiver and shake her waist. Hinata's left leg wrapped itself around Naruto's waist very carelessly, and another rush of primal desire short-circuited Naruto's brain, causing him to feel his mouth leave Hinata's and hover over her bare neck after she tipped her head to the right. A smirk split Naruto's face in two as he opened his mouth wide and started nibbling on Hinata's delicious neck. Na.ru.to, Hinata muttered absently, her tone pleading and anxious. His train of thought had veered off course, down the hill, over the cliff, and hit the ground at 1,000 miles per hour, exploding into millions upon millions of aesthetically pleasing pieces. What's going on here? We shouldn't, what? He thought. It's okay, my host, Naruto said, surprised that he could hear anything other than Hinata's mewling and moans. He snarled inwardly at Yoko, upset that she was bothering him while he was marking Hinata, and bit her neck. A bit too harshly, but Naruto didn't mind. When Hinata gave a little gasp of pain that was followed by gasps of pleasure. Yoko said icily, "You've been repressing your emotions for far too long. That's not healthy. Let me assist you," Yoko said. With his body operating on autopilot, Naruto's mind had little to do but think, and he started to panic when he felt the hidden, primal urge start to take over. Well, the other thing the brain does was on the tip of Naruto's tongue. Wait, that was Hinata's tongue again. Naruto mentally shook his head as a voice said, "Focus." He began to construct mental barriers, as Roshi had taught him to do, first forcing all of his instinctive needs and desires out of his mind. The barrier would remain in place long enough for Naruto to gather his thoughts and figure out how to resolve this mess, but it took him some time to finally be able to rid his mind of thoughts of physical pleasure. When the barrier was lifted, Naruto felt the Kyuubi's chakra seeping out of the seal and covering him in a pale red cloak of chakra. Instead of burning, Hinata's flawlessly smooth skin shimmered with her perspiration, which made Naruto want to nibble on it. He just needed to figure out how to solve the problem now that it had been identified. When he heard Naruto say, "Yoko," he wondered if she really heard him because there was a pause of silence. "Master," she answered, sounding a little perplexed and nervous, but more than that, it sounded blocked, as if she were in a different room. Likely the result of the barriers being put up around him. "What's happening?" Naruto exclaimed. "My goal was to make my host feel good." The barriers began to sway slightly as Naruto reprimanded, "This is wrong. Hinata and I. Stop making us do this," he said, feeling some of his rage wash over him. "My host, you don't understand that I'm not forcing you two to do this." What? Naruto blinked. "This is your instinctual behaviors acting out. I am just amplifying them," Yoko explained, adding that she was using her chakra to help bring out your instincts. "I am as much involved in making you two mate as the air you breathe." Naruto growled as she said this. She didn't comprehend human logic, so he didn't even try to fight her. He had a better chance of telling the wind to stop moving. Unconsciously applying his own chakra to everything he exhaled, Naruto began to focus once more. However, he had to exercise patience because auto-piloted. Naruto was now gently chewing on Hinata's earlobe. Damn, he was a freak. When the moment finally arrived, the two locked lips once more, and Naruto quickly achieved the desired result by forcing more chakra into his breath. Feeling hungry lips on hers, Hinata's eyes widened and she took in the room, blinking. Materials used by the hospital staff were scattered across the floor or knocked on its side, and the whole room was in disarray as Hinata held onto Naruto's neck with her good arm while he groped her butt and carried her around the room. "Naruto?" After squeezing out, Hinata felt a gentle warmth begin to envelop her. It was comforting and inviting, and she wanted to give Naruto a tighter hug. It didn't help that Naruto kept biting her earlobe. In his mind, Naruto yelled, "No, Hinata, don't fall for it again." "Hold on," Hinata said, "this is wrong," and used her good hand to gently push Naruto back. Though Hinata managed to keep his lips away from her, Naruto's hands were a different matter. Instinct. Naruto blinked, and she could see the glassy expression in his eyes. As Naruto firmly squeezed her butt, she corrected, "Please Santo, stop doing that." "Don't stop." She shook her head and blushed at her own words, demonstrating how much she was suppressing. Hinata begged, "Please, Naruto," as she attempted to escape his hold, but each time she resisted, he did something that made her want to give up. Why wasn't Naruto's attempt to suppress the Kyuubi's chakra working? It used to work every time, but now. "Naruto." With half joy and half anxiety, Hinata yelled, putting her left hand on the back of his neck and kissing him once more before time stopped. Unlike the last kiss, this one was probably one of love and concern, a pleading kiss with a great deal of hope and determination, rather than one of need, pleasure, and desire. He felt his hands begin to move up from her butt to her waist, and they parted and opened their eyes. His heart softened, and the Kyuubi's chakra started to gradually fade away, but Naruto managed to get rid of it before he could even finish blinking. He returned the kiss, as delicately and carefully as he would have with a delicate flower. For a brief, comforting moment, everything seemed to be fine as his azure crystals locked onto Hinata's lavender diamonds. Then Naruto had a thought and turned his head away in embarrassment. Hinata tilted her head in confusion and said, I'm sorry, Hinata, but before she could say anything, he let go of her and fled the room, remembering to close the door. She stared at the door for a long moment before her brain picked up on the sounds of panting. She quickly gained control over her breathing after realizing that she was the one who was panting heavily. As the female doctor entered the room, she began, "Okay, Hinata," but stopped when she saw how her room was in condition. "What happened?" she said again when her gaze fell on Hinata. "What?" Hinata inquired. "Whatever became of your bra?" As the doctor asked, Hinata blinked and then looked down, revealing her firm rosy tipped mounds to the room, her bra hanging loosely by her arms. She looked back up, then her eyes rolled to the back of her head and she fell back. With his arms folded across his chest, a massive scroll resting on the wall next to him, and his eyes closed, Naruto leaned against the wall of Konoha's front gates. He was the first to reach the gate and would have preferred to have stayed by himself for a little while longer, but Naruto showed up an hour or so later, and Sasuke, who was sitting beneath the shade of a nearby tree, looked at him critically. He was aware that they would have to depart in approximately an hour, right? Even though he was only 20 feet away from him, the stranger was still there and totally ignored him. He wasn't as conceited as he had been as a child because of the extremely harsh training he received from Obito, Sensei and Itachi, but he couldn't help it. He was a Uchiha. Damn it, they should be respected, whether in awe or resentment. He had other things to think about than the duck-haired boy sitting under the tree, so Naruto didn't care who was around, not even if a man ran at him with a sword the size of the Hokage Tower. He wouldn't just stand there and let it happen, though. He would knock the man down first or something. Naruto would not mind if he sat and glared all he wanted. He was in his mindscape with Yoko, who was facing away from him from behind the enormous cage, and he was thinking about what had happened an hour ago. At the moment, he was speaking to Yoko, who refused to respond to any of his questions. Why in the world was that happening? For the 10th time, she refused to look away from the cage despite Naruto's demands, and he ignored the sound of water dripping inside. "I was trying to help," she said in a low voice, and Naruto blinked. Her tone was so soft and apologetic that it made his anger waver. It sounded like a second drop of water falling a second before the first. "I know you care for your mate but are hesitant to show it," she said. "Perhaps my approach was a little direct," she added, and Naruto shuddered as he heard her, realizing that she might be crying. "Yoko," Naruto said after pausing, "why was it that Hinata's final kiss prevented me from suppressing your chakra? Your instinctive feelings and behaviors are enhanced by my chakra. You were engrossed in your primal lust at the time, which is an emotion that you have long repressed but that is uniquely yours. You could feel the love and the plea for it to stop so the lust would go away when she kissed you," she replied somberly. "So, in essence, she eliminated all of my desire?" Naruto was right. She was crying. She replaced the lust with love, something that I can't completely comprehend. Hence, something my chakra can't amplify, she said, turning to face Naruto before turning back to the abyss. Naruto watched her leave, wishing he could say something, anything to cheer her up. "I'll understand if you don't wish to call for my help anytime soon, my host," she said before moving forward. Of course, she was a demonic chakra beast with no full understanding of human emotions or logic. However, she remained a girl. But he knew better. He couldn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't, and if someone had walked in on them, she could have really gotten him into trouble. In addition, Hinata probably despises him now. Even though it wasn't acceptable, his chivalrous side wouldn't stop talking. He decided to shake his head and watch her leave in silence. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Sasuke was still staring at him with a calculating, cold, and indifferent expression. Naruto blinked, then composed himself and grinned. Sasuke's left eyebrow raised slightly, and he pushed himself off with ease and approached the sitting Uchiha, stopping 3 feet short of him and looking down at him. The grin on his face softened slightly. "What?" Sasuke asked, visibly irritated, and Naruto smirked while shaking his head slightly. Sasuke stood and looked down at him. Sasuke grabbed Naruto's leg and ducked under his unexpected punch, bringing his left forearm up to block his attempt to kick him in the face while using his right fist to send an uppercut to Naruto's chin. Sasuke dropped to his knees, spun his fist back, and kicked Naruto's legs beneath him. Naruto jumped over the kick and then back when Sasuke followed it up with a spinning backhand. Naruto leaned back and watched as the fist passed harmlessly by. Sasuke's eyes narrowed and vanished before Naruto's eyes. Naruto teased, "Wow, still quick," with a chuckle and a smirk. His smirk turned to a frown, and he leapt to the left, grabbed onto Sasuke's left hand, which was holding a kunai, and his right hand, which was gripping the back of Sasuke's neck. He pushed Sasuke into the ground, using his momentum, and Sasuke rolled and leapt to his feet, his scowl growing. "What's the matter?" Princess. Mockingly, Naruto cracked his knuckles. Sasuke stood and cocked his head back slightly. Naruto wanted to smash the Uchiha's head into the floor because his arrogant, smug demeanor was beginning to irritate him. What's your name? Why are you even concerned? Naruto gave a stoic response. What is it? You. Name. Sasuke said it again. Naruto smirked and reprimanded. It's polite to introduce yourself before asking someone else for their name, which caused Sasuke to growl. Naruto's eyes narrowed suspiciously as Sasuke responded. Sasuke Uchiha. I'm surprised you didn't know that, before smirking and saying the final sentence. You say that, but why? I take it you're that Iwa Nin? I've heard that you've learned everything there is to know about Konoha. The fact that I don't know who you are should tell you something, Naruto said, smirking. I only know important things, he added. TCH, sneered Sasuke, I am my graduating class's Rookie of the Year. Sasuke mockingly said, you're not at my level yet, but Naruto merely blinked, unaffected. Congratulations. Sasuke spat in contempt. I didn't expect an idiot like you to understand, and Naruto nearly burst out laughing, but instead shook his head and returned to leaning against the wall with his enormous scroll. Sasuke said, I don't like to be ignored, and he pulled out his kunai and tossed it idly at Naruto. Naruto quickly placed his blood over it, unrolled it, and pulled out his ninjutsu before swinging down and splitting the kunai in half, causing it to split off before it could hit him. The split kunai then hit the ground and dug into the ground all the way to the hilt. Sasuke made an effort to hide his feelings from Naruto, but Naruto noticed that his eyes were slightly widening. After distributing the wind chakra throughout his ninjutsu, Naruto put it back in its sheath, which had a clip that allowed him to fasten it to a belt loop on his black cargo pants. Not that I don't trust you or anything, Naruto said, giving his ninjutsu a pat, but I think I'll keep this out. Naruto wanted to laugh but refrained as Sasuke gave him a glare that seemed capable of destroying him. After Sasuke said, you never told me your name, Naruto turned around and knelt down in front of his scroll, which he rolled out and placed on the ground. He began to read the contents of the scroll and Sasuke stared at him, then sneered and sat back in the shade. Naruto. Naruto of the Blazing Gale, he replied. After a while, everyone finally showed up. Kiba and Shino reunited in the middle of the conversation, and Kurenai emerged after separating from a chain. Smoker meters away. He was an interesting guy. Naruto could hardly see him touch her before he vanished in a rush of leaves and wind. Kurenai appeared agitated and briefly considered dragging him into a shadowy alley. The boy from the Land of Waves arrived last, accompanied by Obito. All right, team. Now that everyone is present, it's time to leave. Are there any last-minute plans? Food, restroom, farewells, etc. Naruto saw someone approaching them just as he was ready to start walking. He thought in frustration, oh crap, no, as he watched Hinata halt in front of the group. Sasuke and Kiba said, Hinata, simultaneously, in the same cheerful, hopeful tone, and they appeared satisfied when Hinata waved and smiled at them. Shino said in a toneless voice, hello Hinata, and Hinata nodded in agreement. Are you here to bid farewell? Kurenai inquired, but all she got in return was an embrace, which Hinata returned before turning to face Naruto, who was looking at his feet with fresh curiosity. Hinata called out to him, Naruto, and he reluctantly looked up. See, can we talk? The two left the group, and Obito checked his wristwatch as Naruto swallowed but nodded. Obito said, 5 minutes, and Naruto nodded. Although he could feel two pairs of eyes staring at the back of his head, he told himself that it was the least of his concerns. Hinata turned to face Naruto once she thought they were a safe distance away, but she kept her eyes fixed on her hands as they played with her index fingers. Hinata began by saying, about what happened, back in the hospital. Naruto said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to go so far, and Hinata looked at him questioningly but curiously. Where was it intended to go? He flushed when she asked. Well, I saw you unconscious on the floor and it always worked in the movies in. What? In? Nothing. See, I'm sorry is the main point. Naruto attempted to clarify, but ultimately gave up, I didn't mean to take advantage of you. Hinata tipped her head forward, revealing only a tiny, adorable flush and a faint smile on her lips. We'll talk more about it when you get back, she said, reaching out to grasp his hand with her left hand, which he met halfway, still taken aback by her lack of rage. Why? You're not angry? She was looking sideways as her face turned red, and she muttered something under her breath that Naruto vaguely understood to mean, I irritated it. What? She disproved Naruto's theory just as he was starting to believe she couldn't get any redder. She said, a little louder than before, I kinda enjoyed it, which made his cheeks flush. "We'll talk later," she said, and gave him a quick peck on the cheek before leaving. She was a strange woman, but damn it all if he wasn't interested in her. Obito yelled, "Come on, you'll be back to suck each other's faces when you get back," and Naruto turned to glare at him. Obito simply gave him a stupid smile before leaving, and Naruto saw that everyone except Shino was staring at him. Sasuke wanted to burn him to a crisp, Kiba wanted to tear his hair off, and Kurenai gave him a suspicious look that made his foundation tremble at the intensity of those red rubies. In general, it was a death glare, but Naruto was aware of the distinction between a die.dammit.die.by fire death glare and a normal death glare because he had used and even thrown around that type of glare in the past. A different tale for a different time. After a final check up, the group left with Obito and Kurenai leading the way, Team 8 in the rear, and Naruto and Inari in the middle. Naruto examined the child and saw that, although he was unharmed, his clothing was in bad shape, with a few holes visible through his light blue shirt and white overalls. Aside from last night, it appears that he hadn't slept well in more than a week. Naruto could see it in the boy's eyes that he was concealing something that should have been revealed to them, something that frightened Inari more than anything had ever done. Typical, whenever he was involved, Naruto thought, nothing was ever what it seemed. Hinata waited anxiously for her mother, who had been silent and motionless for the last 20 minutes since Hinata had finished her story. She prayed that she wouldn't get upset with her and tell her not to speak to her, Minato, or Naruto ever again because she was getting really scared. When Kushina looked down and saw a bowl of ramen on the coffee table, she blinked once more, and for the first time since freezing, she realized Hinata was still in the room. Hinata said, "I thought you'd get hungry when you snapped out of it," and Kushina nodded before grabbing the chopsticks and a small amount of ramen. She opened her mouth to eat the noodles, but then she closed her eyes, shook her head, and set the chopsticks down. When Kushina never waited to eat ramen if she could avoid it, that was something to be afraid of. "So, while you're waiting for your yearly evaluation, he enters your room wearing your underwear," Kushina summarized, placing air quotes around vivid images and making Hinata blush. "He goes away, and you faint when you have vivid images, and when you come to, he's kissing you and groping you and you enjoyed it. Is that about right?" Kushina asked, and Hinata nodded despite her desire to pass away at that precise moment. Kushina leaned back and gave Hinata a neutral, calculating look. "I see," she said. Hinata blinked when she asked, "What do you plan on doing about it?" Kushina nodded and said, "Do, about it? I don't follow." Kushina said, teasingly, "My son made some pretty blunt advances on you, my sweet not.so." Innocent Hinata, all the while maintaining a stoic expression. "It's pretty obvious that he likes you." Thinking of what he would have done if he loved her, Hinata asked hysterically and blushed angrily, "That's his way of showing that he likes me. Whoa, it's not time." Kushina responded, "In a nutshell, there are a couple of complications in it, but that's basically him telling you he likes you," before leaning forward and resting her chin on her cupped hands and elbows on her knees. Kushina said, "Now my question to you is, do you like him back?" And Hinata swallowed. I. Hinata gathered her courage as she looked directly into Kushina's violet eyes. Either drown or swim. With a cute blush, Hinata confessed, "I like him," and Kushina kept watching her. Her lips trembled for 10 seconds or so before she started laughing. She started eating the ramen after she had calmed down. She remarked, "Good job, Hinata. All you have to do is pass Minato's test and you're in the clear," in between ramen bites. Hinata gave a perplexed blink. She stammered, what?" before waiting for Kushina to finish her meal. Kushina explained, "It's just a formality," and used her right forearm to wipe her lips. "Your parents, Minato, and I decided years ago, before you or Naruto were even born, to drill the other person's child if they ever chose to date. Looking back, we probably would have done the same to anyone who attempted to date our children, but we knew that we'd be lenient with you guys because we were sort of hoping you'd hook up." Kushina said, "You know, before the whole death faking event," lowering her voice a decibel before grinning at Hinata and finishing the ramen. "So my father, I'll probably try to ruin my son's mental health before you two go on a date." Kushina thought, "You know, whenever he finds out his feelings for you and vice versa," and she gave Hinata a wide-eyed look. "You didn't mention this to him, did you? Oh boy, I do not want to be Minato right now," she said, causing Hinata to turn away. Heishi frowned as he left Minato's office in the Hokage Tower, and the secretary said goodbye to him. Hearing Minato moan, she leapt from her chair and went into his office, where she found him lying on the floor with a bump on his forehead and the chakra points on both of his arms closed. They left a day ago and were scheduled to arrive in the Land of Waves in 2 hours. Thus far, everything has gone smoothly, both literally and figuratively. They arrived at a clearing that was too quiet for Naruto's taste after crossing the waters in silence. Everyone except Inari agreed. When a fog engulfed them, obscuring everything beyond 20 meters, the group came to a halt. "Guys, be careful," Obito said, turning on his Sharingan. Everyone gave a nod, and they carried on until they noticed a silhouette in the distance. As he got closer to the silhouette, Obito gave the group behind him a signal to stay back. "Obito Uchiha," the shadowy figure snarled menacingly. "What a surprise." That voice, Obito grinned as he recalled the voice. "So, you finally come out of the shadows." The group could see the silhouette better as he approached them. He had on a big black coat that encased his arms, legs, and entire body. Although the coat obscured the lower portion of his face, his dark, evil black eyes were visible to all. The blade was concealed behind the man's back by a hilt that was rising over his head. Aside from the enormous Zanbato, the red clouds incorporated into the black coat were the most striking detail. Kurenai recognized the coated man as Zabuza Momochi, which caused him to laugh loudly and deeply. "At your service," he said, swinging his Zanbato forward with his right hand as it reached the hilt. He treated it as though it were as heavy as a twig. Naruto's throat constricted. He had heard stories about this man, and while they were not nearly as good as those about the Yellow Flash, they were also not worth laughing at. He watched as Inari shivered in terror while he held his ground and squeezed his fists shut. Kiba appeared firm but shaken. Sasuke was somewhat better at concealing his fear, but otherwise he was about the same. Although Shino appeared to be fine, Naruto could hear the bugs buzzing inside of him and knew better. Kurenai appeared to be more concerned about the genin than about her own safety. He remarked, "This is going to be fun," as he lunged ahead, his Zanbato held back, ready to swing forward at any time. Inari's eyes widened in surprise as Naruto leapt behind him and grabbed him by the shoulders. With everyone except Obito staring at him, Kiba questioned, "What are you doing? Are you hiding behind a child?" Naruto angrily yelled, "Shut up," before quickly choking Inari in the neck to render her unconscious. After a moment, Naruto called forth a clone, which, without saying anything, picked up Inari and vanished into the forest. Just as Obito emerged in front of Naruto and used his kunai to block the man's Zanbato, Naruto turned to face Zabuza. "It's better if he's safe and out of the way." Kurenai saw that Naruto's actions were rational, even though she disagreed with the way he had done them. Kurenai gently reprimanded, "Next time, don't do something like that without consulting me or Obito." "Sensei," and Naruto glanced at her sideways before nodding. She said, "Stay back, I'm going to go support Obito." "Sensei." "And if either of us says run, you guys run," without waiting for their response. Naruto was suddenly surrounded by a cold, demonic psychic blanket. He felt a chill run down his spine and was reminded of his death. Naruto ignored it and persevered. Zabuza's presence was this. High-level Jonin learned to use their presence quite frequently. It was clear that Zabuza had adopted the paralyzing fear persona. Although Naruto was accustomed to it, being around people who actually had demons lessened the impact of Zabuza on him. He was unable to say the same for the other members of his team, though. He turned to see Kiba and Sasuke gazing at the demon of the hidden mist with wide eyes. Both Kiba and his dog were trembling, but Sasuke appeared to be a little more composed. "Sasuke is a fool." Naruto muttered to Shino, who was standing behind him, "Your name's Shino, right?" Shino grunted in affirmation after pausing for a moment. Naruto remarked, "You seem to handle yourself quite well." Shino shot back, "Not as well as you give me credit for," and momentarily lost his balance. "Better than those two," Naruto remarked, glancing briefly at Sasuke and Kiba. Kiba's dog let out a sneeze. Shino turned to face them as well, saying, 3, before they both experienced a slight chakra surge in the trees close to Sasuke. However, Naruto was able to stop the person hiding in the trees from harming his comrade before Shino could summon his bugs. Just before a gust of wind froze Sasuke's back and lower body into a block of ice, Naruto shoved him out of his way. In his place, Naruto shivered and slowly turned to face Sasuke, who was staring at him with wide eyes. "Why?" stammered Sasuke, who was still in a daze. Naruto smirked and said, "DD don't get any ideas," his voice trembling from the cold. "ID. Didn't do T. This for you." "Then why?" inquired Kiba. Naruto exclaimed, "To F. Find out W. Where the attack circa C. came from." Just before his body started to glow red with chakra. Before he shook the ice off of himself like leaves, flames flickered to life beneath it. Holding his breath, he turned away from the direction of the attack. Naruto finally took a breath and then spat out a bullet of air while he was flashing through hand signals. Wind style. Air bullet. Before coming to an end, the air bullet ripped through tree after tree for roughly half a mile. With patience, Naruto scanned the ripped trees and their surroundings for any signs of movement. A senbon needle appeared at his feet, and he jumped back as he caught something flying in his direction. Before throwing it into the tree pile, he picked it up and looked it over. A quiet voice whispered, "You are quite fast," behind Naruto. He turned and threw his fist forward, using reflexes he had developed over years of training. An ice wall, thin but solid, pressed against it. The person Naruto saw in the ice had a mask covering their face and was dressed in the same coat as Zabuza. Naruto snarled at the individual in the ice, regardless of gender, and then watched as the ice turned to water. The same voice, resonating from all sides, asked Naruto, "But are your friends just as fast?" "They're not my friends," Naruto retorted, surveying his surroundings. As he did, he saw that Sasuke had awakened from his daze long enough to become aware of his surroundings. Zabuza's presence still shook Kiba, but he was also frowning in embarrassment as he looked around. By this point, his dog was whimpering because he wasn't quite accustomed to it. Naruto yelled, "Shino," and realized he had captured the boy's interest. Naruto gave the order, "Send out your insects to locate this clown." Naruto turned to face Shino as he raised an eyebrow. "There a problem?" Naruto asked, and Shino raised his hands and let his bugs fly in all directions after waiting for an answer. The voice said, "That won't help you," once more. Shino's body stiffened and his bugs came back. Shino said, "There are 4 of them," before turning to face Naruto. "Your clone is currently fighting the same cloaked figure." "Damn it," swore Naruto. "We need to stick." Naruto scowled at Sasuke as he asked, "Where's the nearest one?" "We can't separate," reprimanded Naruto. "This is what they want." Shino said, "I agree with Naruto," but Sasuke gave him a glare. Sasuke yelled, "I don't care what this loser thinks, just tell me," and Shino simply pointed behind him while staring at him through his sunglasses. Sasuke spun around and ran in that direction. "Uchiha, you bastard," Naruto screamed, his fist clenched in rage. He sneered and turned to face Shino. His eyes widened as he received his clone's memories before he could inquire about its whereabouts. Naruto said, "Stay here," and vanished in a haze of yellow and orange. Kiba remarked, "So he tells Uchiha not to go but he runs off anyway. What a hypocrite," but Shino shook his head. Kiba scoffed, folding his arms across his chest and turning his head away when Shino asked, "Do you not remember why he summoned the clone in the first place?" At last, Kiba had the thought. He made a clone to take Inari and turned to face the direction Naruto had fled to. Stupid Naruto. "So what do we do now?" A voice said, "Look brother, we have guests," in a huskier, darker tone. "It seems so," said a second voice, much smoother than the first but still husky. Kiba and Shino turned to see 2 figures approaching them. The person on the left said cynically, "Let's have some fun," while the other person nodded. Just as Zabuza swung his Zanbato, Obito leapt back. Zabuza snarled at Obito, who maintained his composure and a neutral expression. "Stand still so I can slice you into 10 different pieces," Zabuza commanded, leaping and lowering his Zanbato. Rolling to the left, Obito hurled his kunai at Zabuza. While Zabuza ducked beneath the kunai, he didn't anticipate Obito shoving both of his feet in his face. "You know, saying stuff like that doesn't make me want to stand still," he said. Recovering from the kick, Zabuza took a step back and opened his eyes to see Obito frantically making hand signals. Quickly muttering, "Fire style. Fireball jutsu," he spat out a huge ball of fire. After racing through his own hand signals, Zabuza covered himself with a water dome. Water style. Water prison jutsu. The fireball struck the water dome, but Zabuza survived because the 2 neutralized each other out. Abruptly, the water rose once more, trapping him inside a water dome. Zabuza clasped the fingers of his hands together before it engulfed him. In the prison, Obito used his right hand to say, "Very useful technique," but Zabuza avoided looking him in the eyes. Instead, he scowled at his lips. Zabuza attempted to move his arms, which Obito found amusing. "It's useless. Just give up now." When Zabuza was able to make a basic hand gesture, his smirk was completely erased. Just as the Zanbato suddenly appeared and sliced open the prison, Obito leapt away, sensing Zabuza's chakra reaching out to his fallen Zanbato. As though he hadn't just been imprisoned in the water prison, Zabuza snatched up his Zanbato and charged at Obito. Obito muttered a curse before vanishing in a glimmering mist. When Zabuza saw his entire world fade into a black, menacing emptiness, he halted and snarled. "Yuhi." Zabuza yelled in fury. Nobody responded. Zabuza waited patiently while muttering curses. He felt something pierce his stomach, proving that his patience had paid off. As his left hand reached up and grasped the hand holding the kunai buried in his stomach, he bid down the pain. He returned to reality after independently dispersing the genjutsu. Kurenai's shocked expression was the first thing he noticed. She said, How are you able to move?" And Zabuza simply gave her a devilish smile. Kurenai managed to gather herself just in time to avoid being cut in two when he swung his zanbato horizontally. Nevertheless, she sustained a massive gash on her side from the zanbato. A shower of kunai threatened to enter Zabuza, so he jumped back. He noticed Obito assisting Kurenai in standing up. He asked, "You okay?" And she nodded while biting her inner cheek to hide her anguish. She responded, "I'm fine, I just need to rest," and pushed herself away from Obito. She said, "Go deal with him," and he nodded. Slowly, she limped to a tree and slid down. She pressed her hand against her wound, feeling the blood seeping out. After observing her perform all of this, Obito turned to Zabuza. He growled, "You bastard," but Zabuza merely shrugged his shoulders. "A job's a job," he remarked casually. Obito asked, "A job?" But Zabuza began making hand signals without responding. Soon after Obito imitated his motions, the two leapt aside and landed atop a nearby lake. They both exclaimed, "Water style! Water dragon jutsu!" as hideous water dragons emerged from the water and started to circle one another. After a loud clash of teeth, they eventually neutralized one another. Just beneath them, Obito and Zabuza clashed for control, Obito brandishing a kunai and Zabuza using his zanbato. Leaping back, Obito threw his kunai at Zabuza. After using his zanbato to block the weapon, Zabuza swung the giant and let it fly in the direction of the still, airborne Uchiha. Obito's neck was struck by the zanbato's wide hole on the blunt side, which caused him to crash into a tree. The tree fell on its side after cracking under the force. Obito moaned as he attempted to raise the enormous blade, sticking his head out from the tree's side. He muttered, "Holy crap," before giving up and struggling to catch his breath. "How can you throw this beast?" With one hand, nonetheless. Zabuza hurried through hand signals without responding. He yelled, "Water style! Spinning vortex jutsu!" as water whirled around him and then blasted out, sweeping the clearing in a huge whirlpool. Zabuza watched as Obito was engulfed by the whirlpool and lost sight of him. His intuition told him that the battle was far from over, so he waited patiently. Like a bullet, something emerged from the water, and Zabuza recognized it as Obito. Zabuza used additional hand signals to call forth two water dragons from the remnants of his prior jutsu. Obito could see the two dragons coming directly toward him from his position high in the sky. Fire style. Flame dragon jutsu. Obito yelled, spitting out three fire breathing dragons. Two water dragons were struck by the first two, but they did not scatter. The fire dragons briefly halted the water dragons, allowing Obito to fall back to the ground unharmed. The final fire dragon made its way to Zabuza. He was looking for his zanbato at the moment, and he jumped for it as soon as he saw it, right before the fire dragon struck the spot where he had been standing. Obito ran directly toward Zabuza as soon as his feet touched the ground. He leapt and punched Zabuza in the head with a roundhouse kick, but the man in the cloak deflected it with his left forearm. Just as the two dragons came together and struck the ground with a resounding impact, the two realized that the water dragon was now aiming for them and each used the body flicker technique. As he and Zabuza turned back to one another, Obito gasped. Despite being as exhausted as Obito, Zabuza was able to control his breathing. Obito inhaled deeply, straightened his posture, and eased his tension, then his expression changed and his eyes opened. Although it wasn't entirely visible, Zabuza was able to identify it. He evolved. Initially spinning slowly, Obito's three tomo on each eye then accelerated as he took in everything that was going on around him. Obito flashed through seals faster than Zabuza could catch him, and he used his left hand to grab his right wrist. Zabuza cackled as Obito's chakra came to life, and his eyes grew wide as he watched it start to show. Obito merely grinned. 5 minutes had passed since Sasuke began running, but he kept going down the path Shino indicated. He was starting to believe Shino had been lying to him. The quiet voice pondered, "So, you're the one who I'm going to fight?" When Sasuke halted, he noticed a wall of ice forming. Sasuke fell into his fighting stance as the cloaked figure's reflection emerged. The individual said, "I was sort of hoping for the boy with the dog," in a mocking manner. Sasuke laughed. Or maybe even the Aburame. When Sasuke said, "Neither of them would have been a better opponent than me." "And what of the blonde?" Sasuke replied, even worse than the dog, and the other person nodded in agreement. The individual said, I see, and then raised his head. Shall we get started? In response, Sasuke threw a kunai at the individual, but it didn't even come in contact with him from inside the ice wall. Sasuke decided to use his head and went over the hand signals before inhaling. He spit out the biggest, hottest fireball he could conjure, saying, Fire style. Fireball jutsu. And it struck the ice wall. Sasuke smirked triumphantly as the jutsu ended, but it was quickly erased from his face. The wall of ice remained intact. The wall froze over after a few drops of water started to slide down it. The individual exclaimed, You did a great job melding my ice mirror a little. Too proud to find that comment funny, Sasuke simply scoffed. What's your name? The individual inquired. Sasuke Uchiha, and yours? Haku said, You can call me Haku, as he emerged from the ice mirror. Sasuke sarcastically remarked, I always like to know the name of the opponent whose ass I'm about to kick, in his typical manner. Haku was not at all amused. He was facing the cloak figure who introduced himself as Haku after he and Naruto had finally caught up to where his clone had scattered. Naruto questioned, Why are you attacking us? Haku laughed as his body language screamed caution. It is our job, he replied, his voice tinged with humor. Who do you work for? A dangerous man. A man who has a lot of money. In other words, you work for that slime Gato? Naruto inquired, but he was unable to see Haku's reaction due to the mask. He said, Got nothing to say? But Haku didn't respond. I see, Naruto hummed to himself, attempting to appear composed despite his mind racing with ideas. Inari lay beside Haku, unhurt and unconscious. But how much longer would he be safe? Indeed, it is possible that Haku substituted a clone for Inari and waited for Naruto to rescue him. That kind of thing kept going through his head until he shook his head. The ground shook as Naruto slammed his hands down on it. As the earth engulfed Inari in a dome of dirt and he was swallowed whole, Haku leapt away. Shortly afterward, the dome reappeared next to Naruto and opened, revealing Inari unharmed. Very nice, stated Haku. After confirming that Inari was still alive and that she was the real Inari and not a fake, Naruto asked, Why did you want to separate us? I wanted to speak with you. You seem to be the only one among the four of you to have his head on his shoulders. Haku started to pace back and forth as Naruto asked, And what exactly did you want to talk about? Haku started to say, I wanted to make you an offer, but Naruto cut him off. Join or die? He speculated. Haku let out a soft breath through his nose. Hardly. I have a certain amount of respect for you, but I don't think we'd see eye to eye long enough to make some sort of alliance feasible. Ah, said Naruto. Then you'll probably go to the second cliché offer. Go away and you won't kill me. Haku remarked, something like that. Haku proposed, my offer is that you and your team, if any member remains alive once Sabuza get through with them, leave now and leave the boy with me, to which Naruto arched an eyebrow in morbid amusement. I promise to escort him home alive. From there, whatever happens to him is out of my hands. Naruto replied, as tempting as it sounds, I'm gonna have to say no, wearing a fake smile. Haku laughed. I knew that was going to be your answer. Still, it's refreshing to see a shinobi with unshakable resolve and values. Naruto sarcastically remarked, it's true, they can't be shaken, before lowering himself into a fighting position. So are we going to fight or what? Haku gave a headshake. Haku uttered the words, I'm afraid that I am done here. My task is complete. Farewell, before transforming into ice and breaking into numerous fragments. Naruto's gaze expanded. For me, it was a trap. After giving it some thought, Naruto's eyes narrowed. That jerk wanted me occupied so he could. He hurried back to where he had left Shino and Kiba, trailing off as he called forth a small army of clones to defend Inari. Shino and Kiba hid behind a tree, panting. Watching for the demon brothers, Akamaru kept his senses sharp. Between breaths, Kiba asked, What are we going to do? Shino kept panting as his thoughts started to go through possible outcomes. A wall of Shino's bug emerged to protect the three from the kunai rain that was hurled at them. Just as the demon brothers emerged a few meters away, they stood and turned back to face them. Maizu, the brother on the left, remarked, Why are you putting off the inevitable? Just give up. As the two approached Shino, Kiba, and Akamaru slowly, like predators slowly crawling up to their prey, Gozu laughed slyly. Running up to Gozu, Kiba snarled and attempted to rip his face off. Gozu kicked Kiba hard in the stomach while avoiding him. Kiba doubled over in agony, then grabbed hold of his leg and spun, throwing Gozu directly at Akamaru, who changed to resemble him. Akamaru turned into a living drill and spun, making her way directly to Gozu. Maizu, regrettably, threw a chain that encircled his brother's ankle. Gozu landed ungracefully by Maizu's side with a thud. Despite the pain, he smiled as he looked up at his brother. "Thanks, brother." Maizu cautioned, "Don't let your guard down. They might be brats, but they're pretty smart," while Gozu fastened the chain to his gauntlet. He got up, and the two got ready. Kiba yelled, "Shino," and Shino gave a nod. "I know," he said, tossing a tiny black ball to the ground and filling the air with smoke. The demon brothers ran down the opening and encircled the smoke as he did. The brothers ran in a circle, trapping their victim in their chain after their chain snagged something. As the smoke dissipated, Kiba was fighting his restraints, shouting obscenities and vowing to inflict pain in ways that would later leave the brothers speechless. When Gozu said, "Let's do this," his brother nodded. The two released their hands from the chain and pushed their gauntlets into the ground. They both made hand signals and halted on the ram sign, Kiba still chained and their hands free. The brothers yelled, "Hidden art, chains of destruction, together." Kiba yelled, "I don't like the sound of that," as black spiked chains protruded from the ground and surrounded him from all sides, trapping him inside a massive half-dome of chains. "You're probably not going to like what happens next, either," Maizu chuckled as the two triggered the jutsu. The chains started to move so quickly that if Kiba touched them, they would be cut into tiny pieces. Kiba screamed in alarm as the dome began to contract. Bugs were crawling up Maizu's legs when he looked down after hearing a buzzing noise coming from beneath him. He exclaimed, "What the F?" as the insects surrounded him and lifted themselves into the air in a sphere. In an instant, it shrank, and then it burst into a shower of insects. Maizu fell hard to the ground and lay motionless on his side. Maizu wasn't helping, so Gozu screamed, "Brother," before flinching in agony and putting more chakra into the jutsu. "Your friend is still going to die. You might kill me, but he's going down with me." The sphere of chains was hit by numerous kunai at that moment, which inserted themselves into the tiny gaps each chain offered. Kunai after kunai rained down for over 10 seconds, and when it stopped, the sphere was motionless. "Damn it!" he exclaimed, letting go of the jutsu, which caused the chains to drop to the floor. There was a lump in the middle of the chains. Just as Kiba began to crawl out of the chain, Gozu gasped and ran toward the bump. At the last moment, he escaped the living drill when he saw Kiba's dog sprint towards him and start spinning once more. He didn't care that he landed a little further from Kiba than he had previously. He moved forward in. With his kunai buried deep in his stomach, Kiba materialized in front of him. Blood trickled down Gozu's leg and started to pool on the ground, causing two pairs of eyes to widen. As Kiba's eyes met Gozu's, which were now blazing over, his breath caught in his throat. More blood still seeped from Gozu's wound as he collapsed onto the ground in a heap. Kiba gazed into space, then down at his kunai and blood-stained hand. When Naruto stood off to the side with his arms folded across his chest and a neutral expression on his face, Kiba spun rapidly and spasmodically, asking, "Is this your first kill?" Kiba looked down at his hands and gulped. His entire body trembled with disgust and fear. Naruto merely observed objectively. Had he appeared this way when he killed his first victim? "Brother." Maizu struggled to stand, his eyes fixed on his brother, watching his fallen comrade in shock and rage as Naruto hummed. A murderous spark ignited in his eyes as he turned them to Kiba. He produced a kunai and dashed in Kiba's direction at a pace that Kiba couldn't have kept up with at the time. A serious voice said, "Stop," as Maizu felt steel pressed against the region above his heart. When he eventually saw a teenager standing over him, his breath left him, his body trembled, and his eyes widened. He had come out of nowhere. Maizu had been running toward the soon-to-be dead dog boy 1 minute, and then this blonde teenager was leaning against him with a sharp-tipped weapon pointing at his heart and his blonde hair covering his eyes. For some reason, Maizu thought the blonde was 6 feet tall, even though the teen was only 3 inches shorter than him. Then he realized that before he could blink, this teenager had positioned a weapon over a vital organ and gotten in front of him. Maizu simply did not understand what it meant for a genin to be faster than him, unless he was a chunin instead of a genin, of course. Although he was likely a genin on record, Maizu had a gut feeling that he wasn't dealing with a chunin because the boy was much stronger than any typical chunin or genin. However, this genin, a Konoha native, no less, beat him today, and he knew when he was beaten. Maizu glanced at the blonde's forehead protector and thought, wait, no, he isn't from Konoha. Iwa? What on earth? The blade in the blonde's hand moved with unnatural grace, and he lifted it until it made contact with Maizu's throat. Naruto gave the order, Shino, sap his chakra reserves dry, and although Shino followed it, he paused to consider it. Every second, Gozu felt his strength ebbing away until he was barely able to stand. Before he hit the floor, he dropped to his knees and supported himself with his hands. The Chunin cried, "My brother," and Naruto felt a little sorry for him, but it was overpowered by disgust. Naruto gave a stern bark, "Stop sniveling," and Maizu gave him a stoic look. "He's not dead, you idiot," he said, kicking Maizu in the back with his foot. Kiba gave Maizu a dumbfounded look as hope prodded at his face. Kiba said sharply, "He's dead, Ike killed him," in a scathing tone. Naruto gave a headshake. "He's wounded but he's not dead," Naruto assured everyone. "Not yet anyway. Let him bleed out for another 2 minutes and then he's dead." "Bro." Maizu attempted to stand, but was stopped when Naruto pointed his ninjutsu at Maizu's forehead with the tip out. Maizu merely sneered and pushed the ninjutsu away from Naruto's face by grabbing his right wrist. In retaliation, Naruto dropped his ninjutsu and used his right hand to painfully twist Maizu's wrist. After causing Maizu to fall face first to the ground by pulling on it, he pulled the twisted hand up his back. "Act!" Maizu exclaimed as his left arm began to hurt. Naruto quickly put his ninjutsu under Maizu's neck after grabbing it with his left hand. "You want to bleed out like your brother or do you want to live to save him?" Naruto, Kiba, and Shino said, "I'm afraid that he's not the one making the decision," as they turned to face Haku, who was standing on a tree branch with an unconscious Uchiha resting over his shoulder. With Sasuke on his shoulder, Haku's somewhat diminutive figure appeared even more so beneath the cloak. Haku begged, "Please, I'd like my 2 comrades back," and Naruto got up, freeing Maizu from his agonizing grip. "If I get them back alive, I promise the safe return of the Uchiha." When Naruto asked, "Is there some way you can get these 2 back and still keep the Uchiha bastard?" Shino coughed. Naruto let out a sigh. "Fine, toss the bastard over here." With one hand, Haku lifted Sasuke off his shoulder and threw him in Naruto's direction. Watching as Sasuke approached him, Naruto held out his hands. Naruto abruptly shifted to the left, causing Sasuke to fall to the ground. Naruto concealed a smile as he gazed down at the Uchiha. He looked back up and said, "Ah, poor Uchiha," but for some reason, he thought Haku was staring at him strangely from behind his mask. Naruto chuckled as Haku questioned, "Are you sure you two are on the same side?" Naruto remarked, "Ask me that again when this mission's over," while observing Maizu hobble toward Haku, who leapt from the branch. After spinning around and grabbing Gozu by the waist of his pants, Naruto let him fly in Haku's direction. Just as he caught Gozu, Naruto's eyes narrowed and he sent chakra into his foot soles to zip down to Haku. Naruto drove his right foot into the back of Haku's head and used his left hand to push Maizu back. The teenager in the mask was hurled into a tree and slid down, motionless. Pain paralyzed Maizu's body, and he cursed as Gozu hit the ground without complaining. Naruto gazed at the demon brothers, ensuring that neither would rise. When he was certain, he turned to face Haku, who moaned. He started to approach him. Naruto turned his head to the left as the sound of 1,000 birds reverberated through the forest. In the distance, Naruto heard clothing rustling and electricity sparking. Haku had left. It was the worst thing ever. An ice mirror appeared suddenly between Obito and Zabuza as he was running towards him with a Chidori roaring in his hands one moment. Even though his Chidori continued to pierce the ice mirror and strike Zabuza, the renegade Nin was able to gather himself in time to leap aside. Obito's left flank was slightly cut, but the ice mirror was able to fix itself and catch his hand. Zabuza and his accomplice left before Obito could escape the ice mirror. He glanced down at his right wrist, where the ice mirror held him in place, revealing a pale purple ring. Before he heard footsteps, he clenched his fist and then let it drop every few seconds. His genin was running toward him when he looked up. What happened to? Naruto let Sasuke drop like a bag of potatoes to the ground, and Obito stopped. Sasuke. Naruto replied, "One of Zabuza's lackeys knocked the bastard out," and he nodded his head in Kurenai's direction. "She going to be okay?" Kiba, Akamaru, and Shino rushed to Kurenai's side as though they were seeing her for the first time. Leaning on Kiba to keep her upright, she moaned as she used them to stand. She said, "I'll be fine," and turned to face Naruto. "Where's Inari?" When he said, "I told my clones to bring him here," 5 Narutos appeared behind him, accompanied by Inari, who had woken up at some point after he had left. At Obito's question, Kurenai raised an eyebrow and began to perspire. "Anyone hurt, besides Kurenai, Sensei and Sasuke?" Shino said, "Scratches here and there," and Kiba nodded in agreement. Akamaru sneezed after groaning. Everyone stared at Naruto in frustration as he said, "I'm fine." "Well fine, I'll worry about myself then." Obito nodded and said, "Let's get going before someone else decides to attack us at our weakest," giving Inari a moment to comprehend his meaning. He led the group into town by starting to walk in front of them. With his gaze fixed on the third head carved into the mountainside, Minato gazed up at the Hokage monument. He observed everything, from the crown of the head to the end of the beard. He grinned slightly and hung his head forward, saying, "Third Hokage." Minato's nostrils were filled with the aroma of summer as a lingering wind blew past him from behind. Red hair flew over his shoulders and small, soft hands slid into his waist. He suppressed a sneeze as a single strand tickled his nose. He checked to make sure he wouldn't sneeze before saying, "Hey Kushina." He had to turn around to make sure he was speaking to Kushina. "Minato, are you sure you want me to do this? I don't want to mess this up," she said. Although it might have been her voice and her red hair, it didn't sound like her. Minato wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the idea that she would doubt herself, as she hardly ever did. Yes, it was Kushina, with her heart-shaped face, creamy skin, and stunning violet eyes. He asked empathetically, "Do you want to back out of this?" But she shook her head. She paused to think about what she was going to say. "It's not that I don't think I can do it. It's not really a hard mission," she said. "I just want my feelings to get in the way." Minato laughed and kissed her for a long time. She wouldn't be shocked if he could hear her heartbeat. "I love you. And besides, Itachi will join you," he said politely after observing her face. "I know it isn't going to be easy, but you're the one who volunteered to go." Kushina pouted in response. "I was being noble, I didn't think you'd actually agree," she said. His smile was knowing. "You want me to contact Jiraiya Sensei to go instead?" he asked. His smile was met with a frown from Kushina. She obstinately retorted, "And let the old perv influence my pupil? No thanks," but Minato embraced her tightly. Minato's words, "Be strong, come back home safely with Itachi, and don't be a hero if things go south," were so worried that Kushina could hear it. She grinned and gave him a hug in return. Minato laughed into Kushina's hair and said, "You're not going to get rid of me that easily," as his nose was filled with her aroma. "How sweet," a excited voice said. When the two looked up, the slack-jawed scarecrow eye was grinning at them, but his true smile was hidden behind his mask. He was dressed in a typical Jonin outfit, which included a blue shirt, pants, and vest. His gray hair, which defied gravity, was the only distinguishing feature of the Jonin. Right now, Minato thought he was looking at a 16-year-old Kakashi based on the way he stood and carried himself. "You're late," Kushina reprimanded with a frown, and Kakashi gave a sheepish back rub. Kakashi excused himself haltingly. "Well, I ran into an old friend and we just got lost in memories," which caused Kushina to laugh deeply and Minato to laugh nervously. Then she redirected it to Minato and turned her to a glare. Kushina chastised, "Why do you let your student arrive so late? Aren't you his teacher? Teach him to arrive on time?" Minato's laughter grew louder as he gave Kakashi a defiant look. Kakashi simply gave a shoulder shrug. Minato said, "I love you," and Kushina simply shook her head. Before approaching her student, who was hanging beneath the shade of a nearby tree, she gave him a quick kiss on the lips. Kakashi, who appeared to be older than he actually was, caught Minato's attention. "What's wrong?" Minato asked, and when he looked directly into Kakashi's eyes, he noticed that they were tired. "Late-night visit from a friend," was his cynical response. Minato was unsure of his meaning, but he sensed that he didn't want to know. He turned to face the village gate and asked, "You up for this?" Behind him, Kakashi stretched and yawned. He said, "Yeah, just give me a few seconds," and started to extend his legs and arms. Later, as he gazed at Minato, his youthful expression and posture appeared to return, in relation to youth. "Good morning, fearless leader of the Leaf and Kakashi," a man exclaimed as he approached the two men. Kakashi gazed up at the sky, and Minato grinned with a drop of perspiration. "May youth fill your lungs with air and your heart with bravery while out of our splendid village," Guy said, giving each man a hug. Minato said, "Thank you, Guy," and Kakashi blinked at him, seemingly recognizing the man at last. Kakashi calmly asked, "Guy, when did you get here?" Guy looked at Kakashi in disbelief before sobbing uncontrollably. As he fled, he exclaimed, "Kakashi, why won't you teach me your ways of cool?" Kakashi looked at his sensei and blinked. Minato laughed when he asked, "What happened?" He replied, "Guy came along to wish you luck," and Kakashi turned back to face Guy's retrenchment. "Did he now?" Minato said, "Come on, let's get going," and approached Kushina while speaking animatedly to Itachi, who didn't seem very interested. Kushina paused what she was saying to focus on Minato, who who was standing in front of her. She teased, "You guys finished putting on your make-up?" Minato chuckled and gave her a hug. Kakashi simply turned his head and gazed at nothing. Minato said, "Love you," and Kushina burst out laughing. She said, "Love you too," then let go of him and gestured for Itachi to come along. After giving Kakashi a quick glance, the two followed Itachi and Kushina. Kakashi whispered, "Are you certain it's a good idea to send her to Kumo with just Itachi? He's a good shinobi and all, but sending the two to an enemy village filled with shinobi?" As soon as Minato's gaze returned to Kushina, it remained fixed on her. "She'll come back and so will he, I'll guarantee it." After giving Minato a strange look, Kakashi nodded and returned to his thoughts. "You ready to meet with the Tsuchikage?" Minato asked, and Kakashi grinned. Kakashi put his hands in his pockets and said, "I still don't know why you chose me. Lord Jiraiya is a hell of a lot stronger than I am. He's staying here to look over the village for me, you know, just in case anything goes wrong." "Is he?" Kakashi inquired, trying to conceal his astonishment, but Minato was familiar with him and his demeanor. When Minato turned to face his village, a vision of burning buildings flashed through his mind. "It'll be fine, Kakashi. The village will be the same when we return," he said. Kakashi saw the expression in his eye and asked, "How can you be sure?" With a sigh, Minato faced the path once more. He replied, "I got someone watching over him," and Kakashi blinked as he came to a halt. "Who?" Jiraiya signed a couple of documents while muttering and frowning. The chair would be occupied by Minato's ass rather than Jiraiya's if he didn't have his speed, stealth, and Hiraishin. Knowing that his tormentor was hidden in one of the room's shadowy corners, he looked around. Her long, dark purple hair betrayed her, even though the mask concealed her face. When he leaped up, she told him that the purple-haired demon was waiting for him to make a mistake so she could have a reason to take her justice for women everywhere. Jiraiya wanted to yell at her, but she refrained because she was extremely accurate with her senbon needles. He won't slip up the way she believes he will. While Minato was away attending to business, he would demonstrate to her that he is capable of being extremely polite and acting appropriately. This time, he nearly burst out laughing. Even he had to acknowledge that he couldn't possibly have done that. To at least prove to her that he could endure for a long time without becoming perverted, he needed to be strong. Then perhaps she could give him a naughty thank you. When a senbon needle hit the chair directly in front of Jiraiya, who he and other women liked to refer to as Jumbo J, he nearly jumped out of his skin. As he glanced at the corner where the needles originated, perspiration trickled down his brow. "Get back to work, Lord Jiraiya," a harsh but gentle voice called out to the darkness. As Jiraiya signed his name through 10 pairs of documents in 2 seconds, his perspiration multiplied tenfold. Beneath it, an Anbu wearing a cat mask grinned and snapped photos in the shadows. As everyone passed in front of him, Naruto scowled. Nobody would even look at him, let alone speak to him. Sasuke was unconscious, so at least he had an excuse. That being said, Obito would occasionally glance at him and attempt to start a conversation, but Naruto never really responded for some reason. He simply had nothing to say. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk. But at least everyone could try to be kind to him. The boy, Inari, also neglected to mention that Gato had employed thousands of thugs, including S-rank missing nin. Naruto believed the boy should have been struck over the head or something. Until he eventually saw Inari's house, that is. It was a ruin. The walls had patches of missing paint, and there were no doors or windows. The house had the appearance of collapsing under a gentle breeze. There were only bits of cloth that prevented the sun from entering in place of windows or doors. As he called for his mother, Inari hurried inside, leaving the Konoha team and one Iwa.nin outside. When his mother moved from behind the cloth to shield her eyes from the sun, he abruptly stopped. She scanned her surroundings before focusing on Inari. She sobbed into her son's left shoulder and embraced him, her eyes widening. She exclaimed, "Inari," and he also sobbed into her shoulder. "Mom," Naruto and the Konoha team observed, sympathizing with the two. Sasuke would be lying if he claimed that the scene had no impact on him at all, even though he didn't particularly enjoy it. Inari's mother frowned at the intruders as she looked up. Her harsh question, "What were you doing with my son?" confused everyone. "I already paid Gato for child support." "No, Mom," Inari said, looking around at the group. "They're here to help." His mother smiled sorrowfully, blinked, and then shook her head. She said, "I don't know what my child told you, but we can't afford your help," to which Inari scowled. Obito moved ahead of his group and gave her a warm smile. He reassured her, "It's okay, we've still decided to assist," and then he adopted a serious look. "I cannot stand by and do nothing while a monster like Gato is sapping your country dry of its economy and resources. After giving him a suspicious look, Inari's mother gave his team the same look. As they continued to gaze at one another, she once more met his eyes, and they grew softer. With a faint flush on her cheeks, she turned away and tucked a flyaway hair behind her ear. She got up and guided the group inside. After entering her house, Obito surveyed the entire space. There were no decorations, paintings, pots, vases, flowers, or anything else in the house except the dining room table and sofa in the living room. In addition to being filthy, some of the walls appeared to have some paint peeling off of them. Seeing the expressions on everyone's faces, Inari's mother said, "I'm sorry, it's not exactly the best home ever, but..." Obito smiled sheepishly and flushed. Obito joked, "You've obviously never seen my home," but she didn't seem to find it funny. He cleared his throat. She said, "Make yourselves at home," and left, her son trailing in her wake. Obito turned to his group and grinned. As soon as he said, "You heard her. Go find yourselves a room and make it your own," Kurenai's team gathered together, scornfully glancing at the Uchiha but agreeing to sleep with him. The boy said, "Naruto," looking up at Obito, "You're bunking with me." Naruto nodded, much to Obito's surprise, and left for the stairs. Obito glanced at Kurenai, who shrugged his shoulders and arched an eyebrow at him. He joked, "What can I say? I'm very persuasive," and Kurenai grinned and shook her head. Except for Obito, who sent a message back to Konoha to send that second team with the construction workers, emphasizing their necessity. Everyone went into a room and started to unwind. Every team member went to bed early, with the exception of Sasuke, who was already sleeping. They would examine the town in the morning to determine the extent of the harm inflicted by the monstrous Gato. As Naruto left the room he shared with Obito, a lot of thoughts were going through his mind. Most of his thoughts were about the boy he had met the previous day. Naruto could sense that he was strong. Furthermore, Naruto felt that he was the team's brains, with the exception of Zabuza, who he assumed didn't really care about the plans and instead went where there would be bloodshed. Naruto pondered gravely who would prevail in a fair battle. He hesitated for a second, then simply shrugged his shoulders and chose to hold off until he faced the masked ice user. Wondering about such trivial matters would not be productive. He then contemplated his next course of action regarding the trial. He could, of course, flee at this point and most likely avoid worrying about Konoha until it was too late. A group of hugging pansies, Naruto didn't think they would take any action. However, Naruto couldn't simply break his word. Even though he didn't particularly like Konoha, he couldn't break his word, it wasn't his style. His determination to complete the trial grew, and his azure eyes hardened. A moment later, he was on his way to town, standing outside Inari's house. Naruto took a deep breath and braced himself for the worst as he moved forward, thinking about Inari's house and what had been mentioned about the Land of Waves. Naruto woke Obito, who yawned and stretched back in the room. Leaping to his feet, he stretched his back, then scratched it and went to the restroom. Trying to recall the location of the restroom, he crossed the threshold of his room. Before shrugging his shoulders and opening the door on the left side of the hallway, he looked left and right and smacked his lips, adding sound to the corridor. Obito swiftly shut the bathroom door after opening it, thanks to whatever god was keeping watch over him that morning. He saw that there was a shower to the right and a sink to the left in the bathroom. He wouldn't describe the bathroom as enormous, but it was fairly large. However, as long as it had a toilet and was located just past the sink, he didn't care how big it was. He sighed deeply and emptied his contents into the toilet. The morning sun was just beginning to rise when he looked out the window next to his head. He was taken aback by the reddish-orange sun's exquisite painting of the forest in a variety of tones. He was even more shocked to see Inari's mother out and about, hanging clothes on the clothesline to dry. Obito saw the passion and devotion blazing in her onyx eyes as he gazed at her long blue hair. Nor was her physical condition too bad. As he observed how elegantly and diligently the woman worked, his cheeks burst with color. Eventually, a picture of Rin flashed through his mind, and he turned his head away, feeling guilty and depressed. After what had happened to Rin, how could he even look at a woman the way he had? Thinking that a shower would help him cool down, he flushed the toilet and started to undress. For a few minutes, he relished the sensation of warm water washing over his body, washing away his filth and even his guilt. After inhaling deeply, he proceeded to wash himself with soap. As he was doing it, he kept thinking about Rin, and before he could stop it, the bar of soap flew out of his fists and onto the floor from the tub. After blinking at it and giving it some thought, he concluded that he was sufficiently clean. After shutting off the shower, he combed through his hair. Then he realized that he had no towel to wipe his body. He moaned at his own foolishness and forgetfulness and cupped his face with his hands. After pushing the shower curtains to the left, he looked around the room in the hopes of finding something that would at least partially dry his body. Now his shirt was the only thing that could save him. So he got out of the tub slowly and walked carefully over to the piece of clothing that was on the other side of the room. He would have fallen when his second foot stepped on the soap bar, but he was able to catch himself in time. The soap moved toward the door and across the room. With a sigh of relief, he reached for his shirt and dried his hair right away. The door opened at that precise moment, and Obito froze, wondering if he had heard what he had just heard. As he peered beneath the shirt, he noticed Inari's mother entering the bathroom with her back to him. With a faint smile on her face, she turned and looked at Obito's nude body. Before focusing on Obito's eyes, her gaze lingered briefly at his waist, taking in every inch of his body. For an instant, they were the only thing in the world, not the mission, not the basket of towels she was carrying, and definitely not the awkwardness that would undoubtedly arrive in a minute. The two felt as though they were standing face to face, both of them as nude as the day of their birth, and they were not experiencing any uncomfortable feelings. When two hearts briefly synchronized and united, it was a lovely moment. When Inari's mother took the next step, it was on the soap, which was unfortunate for both of them because she was in the middle of her stride. Dropping the basket of towels, she slid forward and collided with Obito, knocking him down as she landed on top of him. For a moment longer, the two simply gazed into each other's eyes, their cheeks both flushed. Before long, Inari's mother got up, walked slowly out of the room, and shut the door. Obito continued to argue with himself on the floor about whether or not that was true. An adequate response was the pulsing pain in the back of his head. He soon got up, picked up one of the dropped towels, and patted himself dry. Grabbing all his clothes with his left hand, he wrapped a towel around his waist. He hurried out of the restroom and into his room. Dressing didn't take him long, and he left the room as fast as he had come. There was no room for stealth because the stairs leading to the first floor were noisy and creaky. He hoped it was Naruto's mother, but he heard footsteps in the kitchen and wondered if it was Inari's. It was the latter, of course, as she kept herself occupied by cooking and cleaning at the same time. She blushed and went back to cooking and cleaning after briefly looking up to see who was coming down the stairs. She stammered, "Sorry about earlier," and Obito, who was standing just outside the kitchen, laughed sheepishly. After saying, "It's okay," he blinked at his response. "Was everything okay?" Obito nodded when she asked, "Are you hungry?" "Yup," he said with enthusiasm. She stopped cooking to smile and give him a sidelong glance. "My name is Tsunami, by the way," she said. He grinned back and gestured to his chest with a thumb. When he said, "Obito Uchiha, Konoha Jonin at your service," she grinned broadly. Obito went to sit on a chair close to the table while she went back to cooking. After asking, "So, what are you doing up so early? If you don't mind me asking," he quickly added the final sentence. Obito shrugged when she said, "Chores. I usually get up this early to get them done, and you?" "I normally wake up at this time. Shinobi training?" "Something like that," he replied, massaging the back of his head as a lump began to grow. She turned and approached him with a plate full of food. Grinning, she handed him a fork and set the plate of food in front of him. She said, "I hope you like it," and Obito gave her a smile. She sat down next to him, and he said, "Thanks," and took the fork. He was torn between starting with the rice, bacon, or eggs. He ultimately chose the bacon. His eyes widened and he turned to face Tsunami as soon as the bacon touched his tongue. She said, "Is it bad? I'm sorry," but before she could say anything more, Obito smiled. He exclaimed with delight, "This is amazing," before continuing to eat the bacon and then the eggs. Obito's plate was empty at record time, and he was sipping a cup of milk that Tsunami had brought him upon his request. She asked shyly, "Was it really that great?" And Obito nodded enthusiastically. She turned red. "Thank you." He said, "No, thank you," with joy. He scowled as he recollected another memory of Rin. "I haven't had a good meal like that since," he trailed off. Tsunami changed the topic after noticing a shift in his expression. She asked, "Do you really think you can help us?" Obito nodded after blinking at her as though he hadn't noticed her. "Of course," he said with assurance and a smile. "We'll bring the land of waves back to its former glory, maybe even better than it was before." Tsunami smiled despite fighting back a tear. "Thank you." As he started to talk, Obito swallowed, unsure of what had possessed him. He inquired, "So, where's your husband?" He was a little uncomfortable asking the question, but he wasn't sure why. He instantly regretted it after realizing that she shared his sentiments. She replied, He's dead," and Obito gave her a sorrowful look. "I'm so sorry, it's okay," she said, utterly failing to control her tears. "It happened so many years ago, so I've gotten used to saying it." Obito asked, mentally scolding himself for discussing such a sensitive topic. Was it because of Gato? Tsunami's expression suggested that he was aware of this, and he chuckled slightly. She took a breath and paused after saying, "It's okay. I can talk about it." Obito knew she would speak when she was ready, so he didn't rush her. Inari's first father was a lowlife. A good-for-nothing bum who used me to get what he wanted, she began to explain. Expecting Obito to inquire about the first father part, she paused. She went on when he didn't say anything. "Since the night I gave birth to Inari, I haven't seen him, and to be honest, I don't want to see him anymore." The only response Tsunami saw from Obito was a slight lift of his eyebrows. Inari's second father was a man named Kaiza that came into his life when a bunch of bullies sent him into the ocean, Tsunami said. "He saved my boy from dying, so of course I thanked him by making him dinner. I took him into my home because he became such a significant father figure in Inari's life. However, I didn't anticipate falling in love with him." Tsunami paused, her words becoming stuck in her throat. "Days passed and eventually, we got married and Inari finally had a real father. Even my father loved Kaiza, as if he was his own son." Obito urged her to go on, asking, "What happened to him?" She wiped her eyes with her right arm after looking up at him. Her harsh and cold words, "Gato came and did what he does best, lie, cheat, steal, and kill," went unanswered by Obito. Tsunami sobbed, and Obito embraced her. Kaiza stood up to him and his oppressing rule, which upset Gato very much. So, he made an example of him and killed him in front of the entire town. She balled his shirt in her fists and sobbed into his chest. He reassured her, "It's okay, you can let it all out," which made her cry a little more. "It's been 4 years. I thought I moved on, how can it still affect me this badly?" she said to Obito. As he always did when memories of Rin became too strong and overwhelming, Obito felt as though he was back in his Konoha apartment, looking into a mirror and asking it the same question she had asked. Thus, he answered her as he always answered himself. "I'm not sure." Rubbing her back and whispering only comforting words, Obito allowed her to cry in his chest. In his arms, she felt so frail and small. Obito gripped her tightly as though letting go would cause her to shatter. She soon regained her composure and left Obito's consoling embrace. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping away the final tear. She chuckled without humor. "I usually don't cry into a stranger's chest like that. I try to get to know them first." He smiled kindly and said, "It's okay. I don't usually let beautiful women cry in my chest, either, but you're the first exception." She smiled back at him, even giggling in response. "If you don't mind me asking." "Yes." She nodded when he asked, "You said your father loved him like a son, right? What happened to him?" Tsunami replied sorrowfully, "He's dead, too. He died because he wanted to build a bridge that would have helped the Land of Waves prosper and get out from under Gato's thumb," and Obito simply gazed at her. He could see how much she had lost. Her son was all that remained of significance to her. "I see," said Obito. Tsunami said, "I hate that man," his voice growing icier but more fervent. "He's taken a lot from me and my family." Obito and Tsunami turned to the left and saw Kurenai standing at the threshold, massaging her left arm with her right hand. "He's taken a lot from a lot of people," they said. Obito said gravely, "Kurenai, you shouldn't be up," his eyes devoid of the usual glee and carelessness. When she said, "I couldn't help it, what with all the ruckus I heard earlier, what happened?" Obito and Tsunami turned away and flushed. Kurenai sat down close to the two and raised her left eyebrow without saying anything. Tsunami said, "I'll go make you some breakfast," and got up to prepare Kurenai's meal. At first, Obito was holding onto Tsunami's hands without realizing, but now that she was gone, he couldn't help but notice how suddenly cold they had grown. He observed her as she went about the kitchen, exactly as she had done minutes earlier. With his gaze fixed on Tsunami, Obito asked her, "How do you feel, Kurenai?" She responded mockingly, "Aside from the puncture wound, pretty dandy," as her hands moved to press against her wound. The previous evening, Tsunami and Obito assisted in cleaning and dressing the wound. He inquired, "The other's still asleep?" I could occasionally feel his chakra signature pulsing as Sasuke woke up and went into the forest. "Kiba and Shino." Kurenai paused before nodding her head, "Upstairs, both asleep." "Naruto is where?" As soon as he finished saying, "Not sure, if you can sense him nearby, chances are he headed into town." The two Jonin heard dishes clattering and looked up to see Tsunami staring at them as though they were threatening to kill her. "He can't be in town," she made a menacing statement. "What are you saying?" Tsunami shook her head in response to Kurenai's question. When she said, "If Gato's men see him," she bit her lower lip. "What's happening?" Standing, Obito remarked, "If something happened to Naruto while he was in charge, he wouldn't even be able to be in the same presence of his sensei. We need to get him back here before someone sees him. Obito and Kurenai exchanged glances before Obito nodded and walked out of the room. Hold on, she cautioned, you can't leave either. Obito halted and pivoted. Before Tsunami could say another word, he said, I have to go get him, and departed. Naruto was unsure of his thoughts. He spent his entire life in Iwa, which was neither a utopia nor a hellhole. In fact, Iwa was doing better economically than the majority of the 5 great shinobi nations, and when you factor in that he lived with the Tsuchikage, he was only a little bit short of living like a prince. Although he wasn't exactly treated like a prince by the villagers, Naruto knew that if he put in the effort and became the Tsuchikage, he would gain their respect. All he needed to do was wait. In any case, despite having only visited Iwa a few times previously, he had never seen a location like the Land of Waves. It appeared that no house or building had ever heard of a door or windows, and that even a light wind could bring the buildings to ruin. As he poked his head into what appeared to be a grocery store, Naruto blinked and glanced around. Only 1/4 of the shelves held edibles, and none of them appeared ripe or particularly safe to eat, aside from the crumbs all over the floor and shelves. In addition, no one was in the store. Naruto sighed and resumed his tour of the entire town, seeing few residents, though he did see some occasionally poking their heads out of their windows to give Naruto sad or suspicious looks. Naruto would have been able to avoid the sudden attack, but he was unsure of how to respond when someone ran up to him and shoved him into a shaded alley. He took a step back and felt something lying down next to him, which was meant to knock him down, but he was quicker to react, catching his footing and flipping his back. When he looked up, he saw 2 small children staring at him in fearful awe. Naruto slowly took his hand out of his pouch and stood, observing the children. The boy on the left wore a rough black shirt and shorts, and his companion, a girl with longer hair, wore a red shirt but also black shorts, and both were rustled and messy, and both were of average height for an 8-year-old with brown hair that was full of dirt. What? When Naruto asked, the children appeared to be startled out of their reverie and took on a sour expression. Naruto's left eyebrow went up as the girl on the right reprimanded her friend for sounding weak. Gee. Give us all your money, the boy on the left said, his body trembling as he held up a rusty knife. Do you want me to do that? Cash? Naruto asked inquisitively as he started to approach the two. The two appeared startled by this abrupt move, as their expressions became more tense and the boy with the oxidized weapon started to shake more violently. Remain back, the boy said in terror, but Naruto simply cocked his head to the left. Or what? When Naruto stopped in front of the boy brandishing the knife, the children's eyes widened in terror. Naruto's right hand leapt up and grabbed the knife, wielding wrist, causing the two to gasp in shock. The boy on the left was so terrified that he dropped the knife. Naruto said, "You dropped your knife," letting go of the boy's wrist and picking it up, quickly inspecting it before throwing it aside, the sound of the clattering blade reverberating through the alley. He then reached into his pouch for a kunai and handed it to the boy, saying, "Now try it again, but more forceful. Give your entire fortune to us." With a little more volume but without the emotion to support it, the boy demanded, and Naruto shook his head in dismay. The boy frowned and aimed the kunai directly at Naruto's stomach. The boy was suddenly flattened on his back, his purple eyes staring up at the sky, and after a moment to gather himself, he looked up at Naruto. His friend snarled and came running for Naruto, intending to tackle him, but Naruto ducked around the girl and grabbed her right wrist, bending the arm high and back, sending pain up her arm, and then he shoved the girl, sending her sprawling next to her friend. As he stood, Naruto handed the boy the kunai he had taken from him and spun it around before saying, "Hold it tight." When Naruto slid his right leg forward and collided with the boy's left leg, pushing it back, the boy looked up in disbelief, then gulped and gripped the kunai's handle tightly. The boy nearly stabbed Naruto in the stomach, but Naruto grabbed his wrist with his left hand. The boy blinked and looked to his friend for assistance, but his friend simply shrugged her shoulders. The boy turned back to Naruto, staring at his face before complying. His right hand went to the boy's left shoulder and pushed him back a little. "Now, bend your legs a bit." After stepping back to assess the boy's form and nodding, Naruto said, "Better," then pocketed his left hand to retrieve a handful of cash, which he threw at the boy's feet before passing him. Even when he heard footsteps, Naruto didn't turn around, but he did pause when the boy and girl ran ahead of him, panting, and then they both looked up at him, their eyes hard at first, then they warmed up, and then they did something that startled Naruto. They bowed. After they straightened up, Naruto noticed the boy fighting back tears, and the girl gave him a charming smile before turning to face her friend and then punching the boy in the shoulder. She reprimanded him, "Don't be a sissy," as the two started to leave. Naruto watched them with morbid fascination, then grinned and shook his head, unsure of what to make of the situation, so he stuck to stuffing his hands into his pockets and carried on with his town tour. Other than running into the children, nothing happened in the town, which was as lively as a cemetery and as quiet as a church mouse. The only strange thing that Naruto noticed was that he was occasionally followed by large, burly men who all wore suits, not just any suits, but the kind that only extremely wealthy men could afford. In retrospect, he admits that he was followed ever since he left the house, and that there were large, muscular men when he first arrived in the town. Speaking of the devils, Naruto could feel 3 men walking behind him, walking a little faster than usual to catch up to him, and he saw 2 men standing a block away from him, their arms crossed over their chests, sunglasses on, and frowns on their faces. As though sensing his inaction, the men a block away started to approach Naruto. Naruto halted his steps and waited for the men behind him to catch up to him. He could almost sense their evil intent, much like anyone could sense the heat from a fire. Naruto barely had time to process the vague impression before something grabbed his right hand and pulled him to the closest alley. He nearly jumped out of his skin when he felt a hand, yes, a hand, pulling on his arm, but there was nothing there. This town has ghosts? Naruto thought in a chilling sense of terror. He could stand up to a giant monkey demon occasionally hurling fire at him and even confront the old man's dust style jutsus without hesitation, but he didn't want anything to do with anything that even remotely resembled a ghost. After releasing his arm, Naruto felt as though something was standing in front of him, staring at him. He blinked as the thing tugged on his arm once more before releasing it. He heard footsteps running down the alley and turned to look around. He heard the men behind him begin to run, and for some reason, he felt compelled to follow the man's instructions. To let Naruto know where he was and where he wanted to go, the entity tipped objects over and knocked a few rocks or dirt around as he ran down the alley, following it as it led him out. Despite its assistance, Naruto was still having mental panic attacks. It had to be a ghost, of all things. Naruto eventually came to a dead end at the end of the alley. With a drop of sweat, he thought, stupid ghost. Stupid me for believing that a ghost was actually helping me, he thought again, blinking when he sensed something using chakra. He searched the area for a plausible explanation for all of this, but he saw nothing but the sideways sliding wall of the building, which revealed a small doorway to Naruto. The secret entrance was pushed into him, and a minute later it was closed once more. Naruto glanced at the wall and noticed a latch that kept the entrance locked. If the entity was going where Naruto believed he was going, Naruto knew exactly who it was, and he simply blinked as he felt it start to leave through the front entrance. I'm glad it's not an actual ghost. The 5 men returned to the alley and looked all around for any holes or hiding spots, but they were few and far between. At last a blonde man with buzz-cut hair reached into his pocket for the radio, pressed a button, and a moment later a sharp static sounded. What is it? A harsh voice asked. The man calmly said, we lost him, boss, and waited until he heard another sharp static on the radio. The voice said, get back to your positions, and the 5 men left the alley. With her arm still in the sling and her eyes fixed on it, Hinata sat by her backyard koi pond, wishing she could get rid of the damned injury so she could go on missions and connect with her team the way she had in the past. Now that her team was in the land of waves with Naruto, she was worried because she had heard rumors about how bad the economy was there and who was to blame. But who knew how true the rumors were? They were just rumors. She merely hoped that everyone had made it back safely. Hey Hinata, her best friend's voice snapped Hinata out of her reverie. Good morning Ino, Hinata said, and Ino, who was sitting next to her, grinned. Ino, who she liked to refer to as the Queen of Gossip, knew everything there was to know about anything happening in Konoha, so when she said, so, I heard your team was out on a mission, Hinata had to smile. Yes, they left yesterday. When Ino emphasized the word, boyfriend, Hinata blushed and turned to face her arm. I also heard your boyfriend left with them, she said. She said, I wouldn't say he's my boyfriend, and when she turned to face Ino again, Hinata noticed that she was staring at her incredulously. It's been more than 2 years since you stumbled. He must truly be unique, Hinata thought as her blush deepened and she peered into the koi pond. Hinata remarked, we're just friends, and Ino laughed. Would you mind if I shot him? Hinata's head shot up and she gave Ino a calculating stare. Ino laughed loudly as she held her hands up in defense. I'm joking. You see? He's more than just a friend to you. She casually remarked, I never said I didn't like him, and Ino burst out laughing once more. Ino said, I'm glad to see you moved on from the Uchiha, and Hinata let out a moan. You just can't let it go, I'm just saying, you once told me you didn't like him that in. When Hinata said, things change, Feelings aren't an exception. Ino recognized that she didn't want to discuss it, so she complied and turned to face the sky. Do you believe he will succeed in his trials? Ino inquired. Hinata couldn't help but smile as she gazed into the pond's reflection of the ceiling. I don't think he'd give up until he passed. Her smile was as inevitable as the sun rising when Ino saw it on her face. After humming to herself, Hinata blinked and turned to face Ino. I came here to ask if you wanted to come with me and my team to get some breakfast, Ino said. I apologize. Did you say something, Ino? With a giggle, Ino stood up and held out her right hand to Hinata as she asked. Come on, I'm hungry and Choji isn't going to wait for me to ask again, Hinata said with a smile, taking Ino's hand before standing up and walking with Ino out of the Hyuga compound. Before leaving his location, the two were unaware that an Anbu was watching them from inside the tree. He waved and blinked, but Naruto saw Obito and the rest of his team leaving the Inari's house. Obito shouted, You made it just in time, and Kurenai gave him a stoic look while crossing her arms over her chest. Where did you go? Naruto felt like scoffing when she asked, since when did he have to tell a Konoha Jonin about everything he did? Stupid trial, he replied, went sightseeing, and put his hands in his pockets. After saying, let me or Obito. Sensei know what you're going to do next time, she left, Kiba, Shino, and Sasuke trailing behind. Come on, Obito said, throwing an arm over Naruto's shoulders and pulling him a little. Naruto moaned and grudgingly followed the Konoha nin. What's happening? With a monotone tone, Naruto asked Obito. Practicing. While we wait for the construction workers and our backup, we need to pass the time. Are you in? Naruto stayed stoic and gave a noncommittal nod when Obito asked casually with a friendly smile. They reached a clearing with trees that were between 50 and 60 feet tall, and Naruto silently marveled at the size of the trees. So, what is Kurenai? Sensei's first. Kurenai raised an eyebrow at Obito, but refrained from scolding him because, for heaven's sake, he was a Jonin, but at least he could act like one. Obito asked excitedly, as if he were Genin himself. Kurenai told the group, today, we'll practice how to fight against a Genjutsu user and a Taijutsu, ninjutsu specialist, pausing before continuing, not so much as fight but defend against such a situation. How are things going for us? Kiba inquired, his eyes and body language displaying his excitement. Akamaru barked, echoing his partner's eagerness, while Sasuke remained quiet and was essentially open to anything. His eyes, however, kept shifting from Kurenai to Naruto, occasionally displaying a sour expression. Uchiha Bastard 0. Awesome soon. Be Tsuchikage Naruto 1. Naruto smiled when he saw this, assuming someone had told the Uchiha Bastard what had happened. Obito, grinning broadly, said, we'll do this in pairs, so pick one person to be your partner and let's start this, as he walked to stand next to Kurenai. Naruto hung on the sides, observing, and Shino and Kiba nodded at one another. Sasuke and Naruto briefly locked eyes before turning away in a huff. Kurenai said, guess that leaves you two, in a tone that made no room for debate. The two said at the same time, he'd only slow me down, and Obito chuckled at the accidental synchronization. When Kiba and Shino were first up, Naruto and Sasuke simply glared at each other and waited. With timing like that, I'm sure you two would make good partners, he said, ignoring how badly Naruto and Sasuke reacted to each other. Cats and dogs were more polite to one another. Naruto gave Sasuke a makeover while he was leaning against a tree, far from the training that was about to begin. Tall and slender, Sasuke didn't look like a pushover. At least not for a genin. And the scars all over his bare skin demonstrated his commitment to strength, which Naruto could admire. He thought his hair was strange only because it reminded him of a duck's butt, but hey, to each his own, Naruto thought. Sasuke was the #1 public enemy in Naruto's book, even though he would never say it aloud. But, aside from the general respect for him, he was little more than a spoiled princess with an attitude problem, and he had his sights set on Hinata. What? When Sasuke's voice snapped Naruto out of his reverie and he noticed the Uchiha staring at him, he maintained his composure and gave Sasuke a passive look in return. What? When Naruto asked a question of his own, Sasuke's scowl became slightly more intense. Dobi, what are you looking at? Naruto raised an eyebrow in amusement as Sasuke clarified. On any other day, Sasuke would have ignored the idiot who was bothering him and never given him the time of day, but it irritated him that Naruto didn't respond to his question or insult and instead just stood there staring at him. Dobi, Naruto thought, but he refrained from smiling. In a hushed rage, Sasuke demanded, say something, but Naruto persisted in treating him silently. Sasuke felt like burning him to death at this point, and as if he thought he could get any nastier, Naruto grinned. Nothing irritated the enemy more than a smiling fool. "Why in the world are you grinning?" Sasuke inquired, his rage escalating like a raging fire. Naruto surprised and enraged the Uchiha by sticking his tongue out, which delighted Naruto's inner child. Neither of them knew how long they had endured this, but Kiba sat down close to the Uchiha with a frown on his face and his clothes signing, suggesting that it had been long enough. "How likely is it that we would encounter two shinobi wielding all three forms of combat in that manner?" When Shino, not as bad as his partner, seemed a little off balance and a little aloof, more aloof than usual, while Kiba whined as his dog crawled towards him before rolling to his back and whining too. When Obito leapt a few feet ahead of him and grinned at him, Naruto blinked. "Your turn," was all he could say before he leapt back to breeze through long hand signals, and Sasuke leapt to his feet, braced for the worst. From the corner of his eye, he saw Naruto yawn and push himself off the tree he was leaning on, and Sasuke jumped away, avoiding the fireball and preparing to retaliate. He inhaled deeply before releasing a giant fireball. Before shaking his mind of Naruto and looking for Obito, Sasuke thought, "What is that dobi doing?" He discovered said sensei staring incredulously as the fireball consumed the still, yawning, stretching blonde. Obito blinked and ducked under Sasuke's blow, expecting a retort, but when he jumped back, he saw that Obito had also jumped away. Sasuke zipped up to the other Uchiha and spun to deliver a backhand to the sensei. Sasuke thought, why would he do that? But stopped when he noticed his teacher getting ready for another attack. Even though Sasuke knew there was nothing he could do to stop a fireball of this size and intensity, he refused to turn away and continued to try to avoid it, even though this time it was not just a fireball but one the size of a mountain. The fireball didn't burn when it first touched his leg. In fact, it didn't leave any kind of mark or burn. Instead, it wrapped itself around his leg and then sucked his entire body. In an instant, Sasuke was encircled by a globe of warm hues with no means of escape. As large and towering as the trees that once surrounded them, Obito's face suddenly materialized before him, his eyes whirling as he blew a raspberry and stuck his tongue out. Disappointed in himself, Sasuke moaned into his hands after succumbing to another of Obito's notorious genjutsu. As he activated his Sharingan, hoping to deactivate the genjutsu before anything else happened, Sasuke thought, damn it, I got careless. Suddenly, the genjutsu wore off, sending Sasuke to sit where he was before. Obito attacked them with the first fireball. Naruto stood beside him, the corners of his lips curving upward, and he looked up, only to wish he had, watching Obito's head laugh as his body was imprisoned in a rock coffin. Obito remarked, looks like I was sloppy, and Kurenai sighed as she leapt from her treetop hiding spot. I warned you against being too forgiving of them. Sasuke scoffed and turned away, blushing at his mistake. But, I am surprised you fell for the genjutsu at all, Sasuke, she said, her voice laced with a hint of discontent and a warm sense of compassion. It wasn't exactly an easy jutsu to escape, so Naruto was impressed when Obito managed to release the jutsu that was holding him motionless and brush the pebbles off his shoulder. I see you were trained well, Naruto, Obito said. Kurenai looked at him for a moment, then folded her arms across her large chest. I guess so, he said casually, dismissing the remark. She said, almost half-heartedly, you did well, I suppose, and Naruto gave her a strange look. He could tell she didn't like him, and although he didn't really care, he wondered what he had done to offend her. When Naruto realized that she no longer showed any interest in him, he started to approach her student, while Obito walked next to him and gave him a shoulder clap. Seeing the expression on his face, he said, give her some time. I know she's a hard ass, but she usually means well. Naruto blinked and glanced at him before shrugging off his shoulder. Naruto stepped back from Obito and remarked, I didn't come here to make friends. If she wants to hate me, let her, it's not new to me. Training's not over, Obito said as he watched Naruto start to walk back to Inari's house out of morbid curiosity. He waved at him without turning, it is for me, and Obito inhaled deeply before exhaling it through his nostrils. Kakashi sat next to the tree, reading the trilogy Minato's master had written for the second time since leaving the village, and if his perverted snicker was any indication, he was reading the second book while Minato waited patiently beneath the shade of a huge tree. Will you please put that away? With a throbbing vein in his forehead, Minato said, I let you read it on the way here so you wouldn't complain, but damn it, I'm not going to stand here while you giggle like a horny schoolgirl. Kakashi took his eyes off his book to think about his teacher for a second, then he reached into his pocket and handed his sensei an orange book. Want to borrow this? I finished it a while back, he asked gravely, and Minato nearly tore the book to pieces, but he blinked. He never really gave the book a chance. He knew it was all smut, but he still felt a bad taste in his mouth for criticizing it without really giving it a chance, and besides, Kushina wouldn't know if he peeked, would he? "Lord Hokage," said an elderly, husky voice, and Minato looked up to see the Tsuchikage and his escort. The Tsuchikage was an elderly man with a large red nose, thick rectangular eyebrows, a triangular beard, and a mustache with sharp corners. His head was entirely bald, though he had some white hair on the sides and back of it, tied in a topknot with a yellow ribbon. Onoki was wearing a green and yellow coat with a red collar, and underneath, he wore an Iwagakure flak jacket. The escort was dressed in brown armor, a long, sleeved purple shirt and pants, and a bag tied at his waist, probably holding ninja tools. He wore a large headpiece with a three-pointed crown, like ridge, bearing both his Iwagakure forehead protector and ring, as well as a prominent piece of black armor running across his cheeks and the bridge of his nose. His hair was solid red, and his beard and hairstyle were exactly like those of the four tails inside him. His fist tightened as memories and thoughts flashed through his mind. This was the man who took his child, not directly, but he was the reason his family was incomplete for 14 years. At first glance, Minato almost felt like escorting the old man to a retirement home. The old fool looked like he would break his back simply standing for more than a minute. Minato snarled, "Lord Tsuchikage," and the old man grinned, pleased to see his adversary so agitated. As Onoki remarked, "Such hostility. Young people are always the most impatient." Roshi muttered something to himself. "What did you say?" Trying to sound like a polite person, Roshi said, "Don't worry about it, Lord Tsuchikage." "What was the purpose of our meeting, then?" Minato spoke in a serious tone, saying that the shorter the conversation, the less likely he was to murder the elderly man. He was so angry, and his desire for vengeance was constantly screaming in his head. As Onoki watched Minato inhale, a tiny, sly smile tugged at his lips. "I want my shinobi back," he said. Minato muttered, "You got some nerve," as his hand slid into his pockets and seized his special kunai. Roshi walked idly in front of Onoki, his arms folded across his chest. "Shall we try to keep this as peaceful as possible?" Kakashi felt compelled to do something as well after witnessing the Tsuchikage's escort act, so he closed his book and put it in his pocket after Roshi casually suggested it. Minato stared him down but refrained from acting. "And I was getting to such a good part, too," said Kakashi regretfully, and Roshi laughed and arched an eyebrow at the youngest participant. "The section involving Amiko and Hanat?" he inquired. Kakashi clarified, the part after that," and Roshi shrugged his shoulders. He said, "I guess we each have our own preferences," and Kakashi gave him a nod of agreement. "If you ladies are done talking about your stories," Onoki mockingly said, stifling his own criticism of his favorite book, "we have business to attend to." The contents of Jiraiya's best selling book now piqued Minato's curiosity a bit more, but that could wait. "As I was saying, my shinobi please," Onoki said again, his smirk returning. "My son is a little busy right now, which is why he isn't here," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. "My son will go wherever he pleases." With his own rage starting to build, Onoki explained, "Let's cut the crap. You and I both know he's your son, but what you fail to realize is that he is my shinobi. And besides that, he hates you and Konoha. Even my elderly eyes can see that the boy, whom I know like a son, has no interest in you or that desolate village." Roshi whispered, "Old man," and Onoki saw the warning look in his face. He turned to Minato and saw that the man had fallen silent, his body rigid, his eyes constantly looking around. "We didn't come here to fight," Roshi said to them. With a sigh of relief, Kakashi cracked his neck and said, "That's a relief." "Yes, sensei, we didn't either." Minato remained silent. "When can I expect the boy to come back to my village? I just want what belongs to me," Onoki told the three. He inquired, oblivious to Minato's obvious anger. Minato surprised Kakashi and Roshi by saying, "He has to take the exams after the Chunin exams. We'll let him make his own decisions after that." "And why should I comply with this at all? Why should his tool be able to choose which side it would work for? After all, it was his tool," Onoki asked impatiently. Minato nodded and Onoki glared at Roshi when he said, "Agreed," saying, "Shut up, old man. We came here to accomplish our goals. Fighting will not help us achieve them. I am my back, the Tsuchika." "Ah." Roshi and Kakashi nearly snickered but held back as Onoki collapsed to the ground, his back hurting like a bitch. Roshi went to assist him, but Onoki stood up before the Jinchuriki could even touch him. After checking on the Tsuchikage, Roshi summarized, "Chunin exams. Naruto decides where his home is," and Minato nodded. Roshi stroked his beard and then held up his index finger, saying, "One condition," and Minato waited for his condition. He enters the exams with his old team. After giving the idea some thought, Minato said, agreed, no harm was done. Roshi said, nice doing business with you, and then he left. Onoki watched the man leave in shock, then he complained and started to follow the Jinchuriki, occasionally turning back to Minato and Kakashi before vanishing into the woods. Minato simply stared at the space in front of him, his mind racing. Hey, sensei, Kakashi said, putting a hand on his shoulder as he approached him. His eyes widened and he stepped back, and for a moment, Kakashi believed he could actually feel Minato's anger encase him in a cloak. It was terrifying to be in the presence of so much rage, especially when it came from someone as powerful as Minato. We need to go, Minato said as he spun on his heels and started to walk away. Kakashi simply stared at his hand for a while longer before following Minato because he couldn't ignore the sensation of his hand on his sensei's shoulder. As Itachi walked next to her, Kushina muttered, I pray to be only yours. Despite having known his sensei for nearly his entire life, he had hardly ever heard her sing. She only did it when she was lonely, extremely excited, or simply thinking about a particular cage. She kept singing, her voice energizing the forest and making animals emerge from hiding, obviously mesmerized by Kushina's beautiful voice. Itachi didn't blame them. His teacher and second mother had the most beautiful singing voice he had ever heard, second only to his mother. If you'd like, Itachi started as Kushina concluded her song, I can dance while you sing another song. She gave him a playful shoulder slap while laughing, very funny. It was strange that she was so happy now, whereas only a day before she had been mumbling and complaining about Minato and how she was going to kill him when they got home. Singing like one, two. Thus, why are you so happy? Itachi had to inquire. With a hint of irritation, she questioned, what, I can't be happy anymore. Who was he to doubt her contentment? Kushina blinked, her mind spinning. It just seems odd to me that you were cursing your husband to a horrible death 24 hours ago, yet here you are now, happily singing a song, he said. With a childlike smile, she kept her eyes forward. She only said, don't judge me, as they eventually caught a glimpse of Kumogakure in the distance. Even though her smile had faded, it was still there. Knowing her history with Kumo, Itachi chose to simply support her without saying anything. They soon found themselves in front of Kumo's gates, but by that time, Kushina's smile had given way to a thin, straight line. The guard bowed his head and said, I see you arrived safely, Ambassador of Konoha. In return, Itachi bowed his head. The guard looked at Kushina, who appeared to be as icy as their surroundings, and said, please, I am just the substitute. Though, my sensei is the one who'll be speaking for Konoha this time. His eyes met her harsh, storm. Like violet eyes, and a sudden chill ran up and down his spine. His eyes widened slightly and his mouth opened slightly. One of the tailed beasts seemed to be in his presence. In an instant, he calmed down and let the two walk into the village. They surveyed the village, absorbing everything. The area was rather large, with enormous structures strewn all over it. People looked at the two strangely, but they didn't do anything else. Kushina was somewhat satisfied when the redhead growled, what are you looking at? And everyone turned away. Itachi let out a sigh, but a tiny smile still managed to emerge from beneath his cloak. He glanced at everyone around him, searching for any danger, but he saw none. Shinobi were dispersed among the civilians, but they weren't showing their visitors any respect. Itachi was okay with that. Hey! The two halted when they noticed a man sprinting in their direction. At last, a man with white hair and dark skin appeared in front of them. Iron was tattooed in kanji on his right shoulder, and a bull's horn was tattooed on his left cheek. The man had on a white forehead protector and oval-shaped sunglasses. In addition, he wore the standard Kumo hand and shin guards, a white scarf around his neck, a long, red rope belt tied around his waist, and Kumo's one strap over one shoulder flak jacket. Itachi and Kushina saw 7 swords slung over his back and pondered whether he kept them on hand in case he lost any of them in battle. He said, what's up, fools? Why didn't y'all wait for me at the gates, yo? Which made Itachi and Kushina exchange blinks before turning to stare at the man as if he were insane. The man laughed when Kushina angrily said, excuse me? Seeing the bewildered expressions on his guests' faces, he clarified and inquired, I'm your guide. Bro sent me to pick you guys up from the gates, what happened? Kushina scowled at the Uchiha prodigy as Itachi deadpanned, I guess you scared the guard so much that you made him forget his duties. Kushina arched an eyebrow before turning to face the man who was staring at her with a very calculating and hard expression. She growled, what? And the man simply stared at her as though he knew her before snapping his fingers. Ah. Ha. I knew I recognized you from somewhere, he said, holding out his right hand. He greeted Kushina, Killer Bee, Kumogakure Shinobi and 8. Tails Jinchuriki, yo. To its surprise. He remarked, it's nice to meet a fellow Jinchuriki, 9. Tails, and Kushina felt long held feelings begin to surface. Among the different emotions, pride was surprisingly the strongest. She accepted his hand and gave him a small, amiable smile. Her pride gleamed at the mention of her son. Kushina Uzumaki, but I'm no longer the Jinchuriki of the 9. Tails. That title belongs to my son, she said. Killer Bee nodded in comprehension, but his demeanor and smile did not change. He led Kushina and Itachi to the Raikage's tower, saying, it's cool to meet you, even though I don't see my Jinchuriki brothers and sisters very often. Come on, bro's probably freaking out right now. However, it would be an insult to refer to it as a tower. It was constructed more like a fortress than a tower. The fortress, towering and powerful in the rear of the village, cast a long shadow that covered most of the village. Itachi grinned as Kushina muttered, someone is overcompensating. That's bro, B uttered, his tone lighthearted. He led the two up the fortress, giving everyone who stared at his two guests a blank look that caused them to turn away in fear. The two were aware of it, but they remained silent about it. When they reached two enormous doors, B inhaled deeply and kicked the door open with unnatural vigor. B flew back into the wall after a book slammed into his forehead a moment later. Like a bag of potatoes, his body struck and collapsed. Before his head bowed and he lay still where he sat, B said, he's ready. While said Enbu simply stared at B for a while longer before shrugging his shoulders at his sensei. Kushina blinked before turning to face Itachi. With a sigh, Kushina entered the office, followed by a wary Itachi. A loud voice said, ah, the Hokage's mistress, echoing through the enormous office. The black leather chair spun, revealing that the voice was that of the Raikage, and the two Konoha shinobi looked at it. I see your trek went without a hitch, how relieving. The Raikage towered above both Itachi and Kushina. A burly man with blonde hair in braids, a little beard and mustache. With prominent cheekbones, tear troughs beneath his eyes, and a noticeable crease across his forehead, his face was extremely distinct. I laughed loudly and taunted, even though I was expecting the blonde nuisance himself, it's still a pleasure to see his concubine and her lapdog. Itachi gazed passively at the Raikage, a vein pulsing in his forehead. Itachi was no one's lapdog, but he was calm on the outside and wanted nothing more than to silence the groan. Up kid. He turned to see how Kushina would respond, anticipating that her fierce glare would set the Raikage on fire or that her cries and protests would blow him away. He anticipated that the tower would fall due to her murderous intent and that both men and women would bow down to her as though she were a goddess or... stopped when Kushina said, wife, in a composed manner. Itachi had to give her an odd look as well. That was not what he had anticipated. I am his wife. Flinched and blinked for a moment as he looked directly into the redhead's eyes, overcome by a wave of icy, primal fear. The only thing that convinced Itachi that it had truly happened was when it instantly turned his head away from them to glare at the wall to his left. Leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. He gestured silently for his guests to take a seat in the two chairs that were placed in front of his desk. Following his silent cue, the two sat in silence, both of them taking pleasure in the man's frown. The man frowned and said, so, what business does your husband have with Kumogakure? B emerged from behind the hefty cage and exclaimed, come on, brother, you need to chill. Without hesitation, A turned, seized B by the face, and threw him out the window of the fortress. With morbid laughter, Itachi and Kushina observed B fly over the village and land close to its edge, a mushroom cloud rising from his landing spot. Kushina said, good technique, which made Itachi turn his head and look at her questioningly. She concluded, I'll make sure to try that out on Kakashi, and Itachi could hardly contain his laughter. Promised, pardon my stupid brother's interruption. Please, go on, and Kushina nodded without question. She got up and reached into a pouch on her left leg for something. She took out a scroll and approached his desk without even glancing at the Anbu that materialized at her side. When abruptly raised his hand and motioned for them to stand down, his Anbu stiffened and were ready to engage the dreaded Red Whirlpool in combat. Before they could summon their cage's wrath, they paused but did so. Everyone present felt their breath catch in their throats as Kushina unfolded the scroll on his desk. Smoke covered the scroll and then gradually dispersed to reveal a cadaver that was battered but still fresh. He gazed upon the corpse. He simply stared at it as though he were asking it to talk, without saying anything. At last, he raised his head again and glared at Kushina. Where did you get this? With fiery eyes, Kushina leveled A and his Anbu after slamming her right hand onto his desk. She exclaimed, I want to know everything about this man. I want to know where he slept, what he did, what he ate. Everything. Her vivid red hair then rose and split evenly into 9 sections, alerting everyone to the fact that they were the former 9 tails Jinchuriki. And if I even think you are deceiving me, I will tear this village apart. I simply gazed into Kushina's eyes, somewhat unsettled by the intensity of the anger that was buried there in her violet eyes. Although she was only one person, he was aware of the kind of harm she could cause on her own and knew she would keep her word. His gaze strayed to Itachi, and he realized that the village would be fortunate to have even 25% of its civilians and shinobi remaining by the time those two were eliminated, especially with the Uchiha by her side. A, however, was too obstinate to simply roll over and let a woman and her fanboy treat him like a doormat. He therefore took the only action a man in his position would take. His finger was raised in agreement. Agreed, on one condition, he said. His gaze shifted to the Anbu on the left. You won't have access to anything unsupervised, he said. Go get my idiot brother. With a sigh, Neji stepped out of the shower and put on the training uniform he had snatched up before going into the bathroom. He would demonstrate to Lee today why he was the team leader. Indeed, the teenager was a strategic thinker and a powerful ally, but Guy picked Neji because he was able to think of other people a little quicker than Lee. He could throw the green clad genin like a rag doll, but that didn't matter. As he walked into his room, a smug smile appeared on his face, but it was quickly erased when he saw Hinata sitting on his bed with a disappointed frown on her face and her good arm holding her other arm. Despite concealing it beneath her cast, she was holding something. That look was never good, so Neji gulped and blinked. He glanced quickly around his room and noticed that it was much cleaner than it had been 5 minutes before. He said, "Good morning, Lady Hinata," and bowed. Hinata got out of his bed and arched an eyebrow. She approached him and remarked, Neji.ni, I'm so glad I caught you before you left for your team training. She gave him an envelope before leaving him, but not before giving him a cheek kiss. Neji knew what was inside without having to look inside. Hinata could tell the truth from the shocked expression on his face, so it didn't matter what he said at this point. The woman said, I wanted to wish you good luck and to have a nice day, from outside his room. Neji simply stood there for a moment longer, then he put on his sandals, shook his head, and hid the envelope in his drawer of underwear. He prayed that Hinata was on the other side of the compound as he slipped silently down the stairs. He was free to go home. No, Hinata. Tell Tenten I said hello, the voice said, and Neji froze. He was so near. He said, of course, Lady Hinata, and he flung open the door before slamming it shut in the middle of his move. Hinata grinned as she watched him leave. She did think it was a little evil of her to play tricks on her older brother, but aside from the fact that it was amusing, he needed to know that she did not agree with what he and Tenten were doing. She sighed and proceeded to clean the compound some more. Before anyone else was awake, Neji finished cleaning her room. Hanabi had to be at the academy in 20 minutes, and she still hadn't woken up. Then she was. Not surprisingly, Hanabi was on the floor with her feet still propped up on her bed and drool pooling around her mouth when Hinata entered her room. With a laugh, Hinata jabbed her foot into her sister's ribs. Hanabi chuckled briefly before going quiet once more. With caution, Hinata knelt next to Hanabi and started tickling her with her good hand. The younger Hyuga awoke and burst out laughing, powerless against the surprise attack. As the air left her lungs, the poor girl was unable to even speak clearly. Hi. Hinata.ne, SS stop, she said. She screamed, I'm awake. I'm awake. In an effort to get her older sister to stop. As Hanabi sat down and wiped a tear from each eye, her laughter subsided. When she looked, Hinata was grinning down at her. Hinata was a pretty girl. Hanabi had to concede. She resembled their mother quite a bit, according to their father. Although Hanabi only knew her mother from the photos she had seen, she was aware of her beauty without knowing her. As Hinata helped her to her feet, Hanabi blinked. In hindsight, someone has said at some point that Hanabi was essentially a female representation of her father, who was strong, fierce in battle, and hard-headed. Naturally, they made sure to say that last one when the man in question wasn't present. Hinata, on the other hand, was simply a younger version of their mother, kind, intelligent, gentle, strong, and beautiful. She felt somewhat envious of Hinata, but doing so would require her to perform all of Hinata's actions, which Hanabi would prefer to avoid. She said, go get ready, Hanabi. Chan, and the girl scurried to the bathroom after giving a mock salute. As Hinata's gaze shifted to her sister's room, she laughed. Her belongings were as neatly arranged as fall foliage, while clothes were strewn about the room. With a sigh, Hinata started sorting the clean clothes from the filthy ones on the floor. Out of the whole mess, Hinata could only find one clean outfit. Hinata saw a slip of paper protruding from Hanabi's bed as she was halfway through gathering up the clothes. After bending over and releasing the paper, she discovered it was a picture of their family, holding onto a barely month-old Hanabi. Hinata grinned as she sat on Hanabi's bed, absorbing her mother. Some things remained the same, though, as Hinata grinned broadly beside her stoic father. Hinata put the picture on top of a drawer close by and went on cleaning Hanabi's room, which was a natural disaster. As soon as Hinata had finished cleaning Hanabi's room, Hanabi had rushed in, drying her hair with a towel in her hands and covering her waist and torso with another towel. When Hanabi saw her face, she blinked, and Hinata scowled at her. "What?" Hinata reminded Hanabi. "You have to be at the academy in 10 minutes, but Hanabi dismissed the remark and shut her door. Dropping her towel, she hurried into her closet and started her morning routine with her sister. "Not that shirt. What's wrong with it? It's dirty." "That's dust." "Hanabi-chan, all right. What about this one?" "No. Then you decide," exclaimed Hanabi, pulling on a white t-shirt and brown pants. Hanabi was about to leave when Hinata grabbed her shoulder and gestured to her freshly made bed. "I'm going to get breakfast," she said. There were blue shorts and a sleeveless, V-necked shirt with mesh armor underneath on the bed. As Hinata left the room, Hanabi scowled but proceeded to change. She hurried to the kitchen to make breakfast for her sister. Even though she was running late, she wasn't going to allow her to leave the house without eating breakfast. By the time Hanabi descended, Hinata had toasted some bread and was given it along with a banana, her favorite fruit, and a glass of milk. After grabbing her breakfast and downing the milk, Hanabi hurried out the door, carrying her toast and banana. Hinata grinned as she silently watched her go. She would normally go train with her teammates or go find Ino, but it would be prudent to postpone the training because her arm was in a cast. She looked around with a heavy sigh. Cleaning would be pointless because the branch house members had already done a good job of cleaning the house. When a branch member passed by, Hinata grinned and bowed, and the member immediately left after bowing. Knowing her father would be in his office, she made the decision to pay him a visit. She greeted and bowed to many of her family members as she passed them on the way there. While some bowed with stoic or fearful expressions, others smiled back with a bow. She couldn't claim she didn't sympathize, but she must have felt a little hurt by that. Their brains could be transformed into a pulpy, wet mass by the main branch. Even though no one had ever seen her do it, they were still afraid of her because it was still possible. She waited for Haishi to give her permission to enter his office after knocking on his door. Silently, she entered, closed his door, and took a seat in front of him. He was now going over some documents that the elders had given him, probably the Hyuga clan's financial report. At least not right now. Hinata had no idea and had no desire to find out. She finally said, "Good morning, father," as she watched him set down the report. Hinata caught the hardly perceptible twinkle in his eyes, and he was pleased to see her. He said, "I hope all is well, my daughter," which Hinata interpreted as him being concerned about her. She gave a nod. Haishi decoded the statement, "I am doing well, thank you for asking, father," as, "I'm fine, stop worrying." "Don't tell me not to worry." Hinata raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't want my eldest daughter to be in danger again." "I promise, Dad, I'll be all right. Stop being such a baby to me." Haishi arched an eyebrow this time. "Never, I am just making sure." She rolled her eyes as he reassured her. "That boy is no good, get rid of him already. That is starting to become a hindrance. When do you intend to be rid of it?" "He's not a hindrance, he's been teaching me new things. It is quite all right, it gives me time to meditate more and recover. And I was told that it could come off around the time of the Chunin exams. Besides, it's only a matter of time until we decide whether to stay together or part ways. I better not hear that he attacked you again, or I'm going to make sure he never makes a miniature copy of himself." "I see, I still think you should be more careful." Hinata nodded and flushed. As Hinata's thoughts relived that day in the hospital, the room fell silent. Her face was getting darker, and Haishi simply arched an eyebrow. Haishi had to admit that since that day, their relationship had become a little awkward. He nearly wished she hadn't told anyone. Nearly. "Be ready for some hard training when that cast is taken off. Be ready because I'm going to kill that boy when he returns." "Yes, father. Old man, we'll see you." Neither of them blinked as they simply gazed at one another. After a while, Haishi blinked and picked up a fresh report, skimming it with his eyes before setting it down to return his attention to Hinata. He found it extremely difficult to look at her without also seeing a glimpse of his wife. He knew that one day he would have to let his not.so little girl go out into the world without him holding her hand, though it was a difficult realization. He would always be there for her, but eventually she wouldn't need him. The only thing that frightened him more than her untimely death was that. He said, "I don't know what else to talk about, it's getting awkward, and I'm getting hungry. Do me a favor, Hinata, and go with Izumi to the grocery store." I remember someone telling me that we're almost out of food and I know that you like to help her take stock of our inventory. Hinata smiled and nodded as she got up. She approached her father in silence and gave him a cheek kiss. She said, "I love you," before making her way to the door. "Quite. I love you, too," Hinata said before heading out to locate Izumi. Lord Rakage. He was so close to going home and taking a nice, hot bath that he paused when he turned and saw his secretary running up to him. He vowed that if what she was bringing him wasn't important, he would tear a new one into her. What? Not that it mattered to the fastest man on the planet, aside from the yellow flash, he's on a whole other level of speed. But the man snapped, and the black-haired secretary stopped where she was and looked up at the giant of a man standing only 5 feet away. I've met up with Team Delta. Why don't you know, the team sent to search L Lord High. Woman, spit it out. Before her body stiffened and straightened, the little woman squeaked. Team Delta discovered an interesting object in a hidden lair beneath Lord Hiroku's house. The woman screamed in fear, and he just stared at her, waiting for his mind to process what she had said. His eyes narrowed after a few minutes of mentally separating the words, and a clean journal dropped into his left outstretched hand. He glanced around the journal, but there were no writing or traps of any kind, and his gaze returned to her before returning to the journal when she gestured for him to read it. "I'll read it in my chamber, thank you," he said, and then he turned to leave, his eyes fixed only on the book he was holding, something about it giving him the chills. With a sudden sense of dread, he dropped the book, stared at it for a moment, then shook his head and walked away to his chambers, feeling that whatever was written there, he would need to get in touch with his brother and possibly Kushina. The entire day was so much fun for Kushina that she nearly forgot why they were there. Kushina and B laughed together as they conversed in Kumo's largest, but best kept secret library. Kushina told B about some of Minato's embarrassing moments, and B told Kushina about A's. "Will you please hold it in?" On paper, the man was as interesting as moldy cheese, which aside from its peculiar color wasn't as interesting as one might think. The only thing that made the man stand out, according to Kumo's Anbu, was that after work, he would disappear for an hour or so before heading home. Itachi asked, keeping the scroll he was reading in front of his face. He was almost ready to return to Konoha, nothing suspicious had appeared yet. However, that was only on paper, since his life had been documented for nearly every minute of every day since he began working in Kumo's T&I. Itachi was interested in him. The only issue was that there was no evidence that he was anything other than a regular shinobi who was serving his village. As she and B got up from their seats, Kushina said, "Hey, Itachi, let's call it a night," adding, "B's inviting us to eat, and I'm starving." She added, flashing a smile at the end. Itachi's sweat dropped but nodded as he rolled up the scroll and left it on the table. "All right, come on." Soon after, as Kushina had requested or threatened, she and Itachi were seated next to Killer B at a ramen stand. "So, B, how are things going for you with the 8 tails?" As the three waited patiently for their food, Kushina asked. B just hummed as he folded his arms and began to think. Kushina watched him as his face occasionally changed expressions or scrunched up, leading her to believe that he was speaking to the Biju. Oh, at this moment, the ancient fossil has no desire to speak, lazy as hell. But yeah, he's usually good, except for right now. B smiled as he responded, a bit of a smart ass, but I can't complain. Yo. Kushina turned to Itachi, who was reading something he had likely written down while in the library, and laughed. Itachi. Kushina bellowed as she ripped the note out of Itachi's hands. He blinked before turning his eyes to Kushina. He glared at her but she wasn't intimidated. Don't give me that look, she reprimanded him. We decided not to make copies of any documents we found down there, and Itachi sighed and shook his head. It's not a copy of any kind. Just a map of the village, he said, forcing Kushina to place the map on the table in front of them before he began pointing at the circles he had drawn on random spots. These locations are where Hiroku worked, ate, and slept, as dictated by Kumo's Anbu, he told her. Then he looked up at B. With your permission and guidance, we'd like to see these places, he said, giving Kushina a silencing look. She wanted to slap the back of his head, but she chose to keep quiet and see where this would lead. Well, I'm not sure. The sound of bowls hitting the table was heard, and the three looked up to see their ramen sitting directly in front of them. I'd have to ask Big Bro, but, B said, looking around before gathering the two around him, I'm sure I can do it anyway. Kushina grinned joyfully and Itachi nodded gratefully. To companionship. B watched in morbid fascination before starting his ramen, albeit slowly. Itachi, who was already accustomed to eating like his surrogate mother, started his ramen without any issues. Before long, B had consumed 4 bowls, Itachi had consumed 3, and Kushina was on her 10th. As she approached her 11th, all three of them sensed a sudden presence behind them. The man turned to face the Anbu kneeling in front of him and sighed, "Lord B. What is bro's desire? I'm consuming food." The Anbu did not recoil when he yelled impatiently. The Anbu remarked, "I was sent by Lord Rakage to get you. Lord B, he wants you to meet him in his chambers." And B let out another sigh, this time with a little more annoyance, saying, "Sure, let's go, sir, what about? I'm positive they can recall the location of their hotel. This should be enough. You eat any more and you're paying for that," B said, interrupting the Anbu. Itachi nodded instantly, and Kushina simply waved. The Anbu paused, but vanished without saying anything more. B got up and slapped some cash on the table, pointing to Kushina at the end, who simply gave a sheepish smile. B muttered a farewell and departed, and Kushina saw Itachi start to calm down. After finishing the ramen, Kushina got up and grabbed the map out of Itachi's hands once more. Itachi blinked and then hung his head in defeat as he started to follow his sensei, but he stopped and blinked when Kushina dashed back into the ramen stand. "Let's go check these places out," she whispered as she started to slip out of the stand. "Would you mind giving me a salt ramen to go?" With a skewed smile, she asked, and Itachi shook his head while holding his face in his hands.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.